The train whistle cut through the November dusk like a blade through cold butter. Steam hissed against the wooden platform of Dusty Hollow's depot, and the few waiting souls pulled their coats tighter against the wind that swept down from the mountains. Lena Mae Bellamy stepped down from the third-class car, her worn leather boots hitting the platform with a solid thud. She was a tall woman, near 30 by the lines around her eyes, with broad shoulders that filled out her traveling dress better than most ladies would consider proper. Her face was round, pleasant enough, though weathered by whatever roads had brought her here. When she spoke to the porter about her single canvas bag, her voice carried the soft cadence of somewhere far south of these Colorado territories. "Thank you kindly," she said, taking the bag with hands that showed they knew work. The porter touched his cap and moved on to help others. Lena stood there a moment, looking up and down the platform. Her fingers found the letter in her coat pocket, the paper soft from handling. She didn't need to read it again. The words were burned into her memory. "Come to Dusty Hollow. I have work for you, Martha Henshaw." But there was no Martha Henshaw waiting. No one at all who seemed to be looking for a tall woman from Alabama with more hope than money in her pockets. The depot began to empty. Families reunited with embraces and tears. Men hefted trunks onto wagons. The train wheezed and clanked, preparing to continue its journey west. Still Lena waited, her bag at her feet, watching the street beyond the depot for any sign of a woman who might be Martha. The station master, a thin man with spectacles perched on a sharp nose, approached her. "Ma'am, train's pulling out. Depot closes in an hour." "I'm expecting someone," Lena said. "Mrs. Martha Henshaw. Do you know where I might find her?" The man's face shifted, something crossing it that might have been recognition or might have been pity. "Henshaw Place is on 3rd Street. Big yellow house with green shutters. Can't miss it." He paused, adjusted his spectacles. "Though I should tell you, ma'am, the Henshaws left for California near 2 weeks ago. Sudden-like. Something about Mr. Henshaw's health." The words hit Lena like a physical blow, but she kept her face still. She'd learned that much, at least in her 30 years. "Don't show the hurt. Don't let them see you buckle." "I see," she said quietly. "Thank you for telling me." The station master lingered a moment, perhaps waiting to see if she'd cry or rage or faint like women were supposed to do. When she did neither, he touched his cap and retreated to his office. Lena picked up her bag. The weight of it, everything she owned in the world, seemed heavier now. She had 17 cents in her purse, enough for a meal. Maybe, but not for a room, not for a ticket back to anywhere. She walked from the depot into the town proper. Dusty Hollow sat in a valley between 2 ridges, the kind of place that existed because the railroad needed a water stop and cattlemen needed somewhere to drink away their earnings. The main street was wide and rutted, lined with establishments that catered to those passing through Sanders' Saloon, the Cattleman's Rest Hotel, McCready's General Store, and a handful of others. The wind picked up as she walked, carrying the bite of coming snow. Ladies pulled their shawls tight and hurried past, some casting glances at the tall stranger with no apparent destination. Men touched their hat brims out of habit. Though their eyes asked questions, their mouths were too polite to voice. The yellow house with green shutters stood on 3rd Street, just as the station master had said. But the windows were dark, the porch bare of the rocking chairs that should have sat there. A sign nailed to the front door confirmed what Lena already knew. Property of First National Bank of Denver. She stood there looking at that sign until her fingers grew numb in the cold. Then she turned and walked back toward the center of town, her mind calculating 17 cents. No connections, no recommendations without Martha. Winter coming on hard. The Cattleman's Rest Hotel glowed with lamplight and promise of warmth. She pushed through the door into a lobby that smelled of pipe smoke and leather and coffee. A few men sat in chairs near the fire, discussing cattle prices. They looked up when she entered, then back to their conversation. The desk clerk, a young man with slicked hair and a thin mustache, smiled professionally. "Good evening, ma'am. Looking for a room?" "What's your rate?" Lena asked, though she already knew the answer wouldn't matter. "$1.50 a night, $2 with meals included." She nodded as if considering. "I see. And do you perhaps need any help I cook, clean, mend? I'm not asking for charity. Just honest work." The clerk's smile faltered. "I'm sorry, ma'am. We're fully staffed. You might try the boarding house on Elm Street. Mrs. Pritchard sometimes takes in... That is, she sometimes has arrangements for ladies in need of employment." Lena understood what he wasn't saying. She'd heard that particular tone before. "Thank you," she said, and turned to go. Outside, the cold hit her again. She pulled her coat tighter, though it did little good against the wind. The boarding house on Elm Street. She knew what kind of arrangements were made in such places, what kind of employment was offered to women with no money and no connections. Not yet, not unless there was no other choice. She tried the restaurant next, a small place called May's Kitchen. The woman who must have been May herself, flour in her gray hair and weariness in her eyes, listened to Lena's offer. "I've got my daughter and my daughter-in-law already," May said, not unkindly. "Can barely keep us all busy as it is. Winter's slow in these parts." At the general store, McCready himself suggested she try the saloon. "Sometimes they need help," he said, not meeting her eyes. By the time she reached the stage depot at the edge of town, full dark had fallen. The temperature had dropped further, and her breath came in white clouds. The depot was small, just a way station, really, with a single room for waiting and a lean-to stable for the horses. The door was locked, but light showed through the windows. Lena knocked, then knocked again harder when no one answered. "We're closed," a voice called from inside. "Stage doesn't run again till Tuesday." "Please," Lena called back. "I'm not looking for the stage. I just need somewhere out of the wind for tonight. I can work cook, clean, mend. I won't be any trouble." There was a long silence. Then the sound of boots on wooden floor. The door opened to reveal a stout woman in a worn dress, gray-streaked hair pulled back severely. She looked Lena up and down with the kind of assessment that took in everything from the quality of her boots to the straightness of her spine. "You running from something?" the woman asked bluntly. "No, ma'am. Running to something that turned out not to be there. Husband. Work. A position that was promised. The family left town before I arrived." "The woman Mrs. Garrett." She introduced herself as considered this. "I can't pay you." "I'm not asking for pay. Just a corner out of the cold." "Can you really cook?" "Yes, ma'am. Raised in Alabama. I know my way around a kitchen." "Mrs." Garrett was about to respond when the sound of hooves on frozen ground made them both turn. A single rider approached through the darkness, tall in the saddle, moving with the easy grace of someone who lived more on horseback than on foot. He dismounted at the edge of the lamplight spilling from the doorway. Lena's first impression was of height and breadth. A big man, made bigger by the heavy coat he wore. His face was shadowed by his hat brim, but she could see dark hair that needed cutting and the stubble of several days without a razor. "Evening, Mrs. Garrett," he said, touching his hat. His voice was deep, quiet, like distant thunder. "Wyatt, Mrs." Garrett replied. "Bit late to be heading back to your place?" "Had business in town." He glanced at Lena, then back to Mrs. Garrett. "Everything all right here?" "Just discussing arrangements with Miss Bellamy," Lena supplied. "Lena May Bellamy." The man called Wyatt looked at her again, a longer assessment this time. She met his gaze steadily, lifting her chin slightly. She was used to being taller than most women, nearly as tall as many men, but this one still had several inches on her. Miss Bellamy's found herself without a position. "Mrs." Garrett explained. "She was offering to work for a night's shelter." "That's so." Wyatt's attention stayed on Lena. In the lamplight, she could see his face better now, weathered but not old, maybe 5 years past her own age, clean-shaven. He might have been handsome in a rough way. As it was, he looked like what he probably was, a man who worked cattle and lived alone and came to town only when necessity demanded. "It is," Lena said simply. He reached into his coat, pulled out a leather purse. Without flourish or comment, he placed several coins on the small table just inside the door. "For the ladies' room and board," he said to Mrs. Garrett. "Whatever that covers. Wyatt Dorsey, that's nearly a week's." "Whatever it covers," he repeated. Then, to Lena, "Ma'am." He turned to go, but Lena's voice stopped him. "I can't accept that." He paused, looked back over his shoulder. "Didn't ask you to. Asked Mrs. Garrett to." A ghost of something that might have been a smile touched his mouth. "You work it out with her however suits you." He swung back into the saddle with an ease that belied his size, but before he could turn his horse, Lena stepped out of the doorway. "Why?" she asked. For a long moment, he sat there in the darkness beyond the lamplight. When he spoke, his voice was even quieter than before. "Cold night. Seems like everybody ought to have someplace warm to sleep on a cold night." Then he touched his heels to the horse's sides and was gone, the sound of hooves fading into the darkness. Lena stood there until Mrs. Garrett's hand on her arm drew her back inside. "Well," the older woman said, closing the door against the cold, "seems you've got yourself a room after all. That's Wyatt's way, doesn't say much, but when he does something, he does it thorough." She paused, studying Lena with new interest. "Though I've never known him to do something like that for a stranger before." "I'll work for it," Lena said, "every cent's worth." "I expect you will." "Mrs. Garrett said, "Come on, then. Let's get you settled and see what you can do with the sorry mess I call a kitchen. Lord knows it could use someone who knows the difference between seasoning and hoping for the best." As Lena followed her through to the back rooms, she found herself thinking about the man on the horse, the easy way he'd placed that money down, like it was nothing, the way he'd looked at her not with pity or calculation, but with something she couldn't quite name. "That Mr. Dorsey," she said carefully. "He lives near town, about 3 miles north, has a small spread up there, runs cattle, keeps to himself mostly. Good man, though, quiet as a stone, but good as his word." Mrs. Garrett opened a door to reveal a small but clean room. "This'll be yours. It's not much, but the roof doesn't leak, and the stove in the corner works if you're not too demanding." It was more than Lena had hoped for an hour ago. "It's fine, more than fine. I'll show you the kitchen. You can start in the morning unless you're hungry now. I've got some stew left from dinner." Yes, thank you. I haven't eaten since morning." As she followed Mrs. Garrett to the kitchen, Lena thought again about the rider in the darkness, Wyatt Dorsey. She rolled the name around in her mind, wondering what kind of man paid for a stranger's room without wanting thanks or explanation or anything at all in return. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Snow would come soon, maybe tonight, but she was inside now, warm, with a bed to sleep in and work to do in the morning. All because a quiet man on a tall horse had decided everybody deserved someplace warm on a cold night. She'd remember that. However this turned out, whatever came next, she'd remember. The morning came gray and bitter, with frost etched on the windows like lace made of ice. Lena woke before dawn, habit from years of rising to tend fires and start bread. The small stove in her room had gone cold during the night, but she'd slept warm enough under the quilts Mrs. Garrett had provided. She dressed quickly, pinned her hair back severely, and made her way to the kitchen. Mrs. Garrett was already there, stoking the larger stove. "You're up early," the older woman observed. "Old habits," Lena said. "What needs doing first?" "Coffee. The stage drivers and early travelers expect it hot and ready by 6. Then biscuits. I've got bacon and beans from yesterday that need warming." Lena set to work without further instruction. She found the coffee, measured it by feel, set water to boiling. While it heated, she checked the flour bin, the lard crock, the state of the sourdough starter. Everything was there, just needed organizing, needed a system. By the time the first traveler knocked on the door, coffee was ready, biscuits were browning, and the smell of breakfast filled the small depot. Mrs. Garrett served at the counter while Lena worked in the kitchen, and they fell into a rhythm as if they'd been doing it for months instead of minutes. "Lord above, Mrs." Garrett said after the morning rush had passed. "Where'd you learn to cook like that? Those biscuits were lighter than anything I've managed in years." "My mama," Lena said, scrubbing the heavy iron skillet. "She worked kitchens all her life, taught me that feeding people was honest work, nothing to be ashamed of." "Nothing shameful about honest work, Mrs." Garrett agreed. She poured 2 cups of coffee, handed one to Lena. "Sit a spell. We've got an hour before the noon stage." They sat at the small table near the window. Outside, the sun had broken through the clouds, turning the frost to diamonds before melting it away entirely. "That Wyatt Dorsey, Mrs." Garrett said suddenly. "He came back." Lena's hand stilled on her coffee cup. "Came back. About an hour after he left last night, knocked on the back door, left this." She pulled out a small bundle wrapped in brown paper. "Said it was for you. Said you'd likely need it." Inside the paper were simple things: a cake of soap, a comb, a small sewing kit, a pair of wool stockings. Practical things, necessary things, the kind of things a person might need if they'd arrived with only one bag and winter coming on. Lena stared at the items, something tight in her throat. "He doesn't know me." "No, Mrs." Garrett agreed. "He doesn't. Like I said, Wyatt's different. Lost his wife 5 years back. Fever took her and their baby both. He's been alone up at that ranch ever since. Comes to town for supplies, does his business, goes home. This is the most I've seen him involve himself with anyone in all that time." "I should thank him." "You could try. Don't know as he'd stand still long enough to hear it." "Mrs." Garrett studied her. "You planning to stay in Dusty Hollow?" "I don't know," Lena answered honestly. "I suppose that depends on whether there's work to be had." "Well, you've got work here as long as you want it. Can't pay much, but room and board and a little besides. And if you're as handy with a needle as you are with a skillet, I know plenty of folks who need mending done." It was more than Lena had dared hope for. "Thank you. I mean that truly." "Don't thank me yet. Wait till you see what the stage drivers track in after a muddy day." They worked through the noon meal, serving a handful of travelers and 2 locals who'd heard about the new cook's biscuits. By afternoon, Lena had reorganized the pantry, started a pot of stew for supper, and mended 3 tablecloths Mrs. Garrett had been meaning to get to for months. Near sunset, she stepped out the back door to empty the wash water and saw him. Wyatt Dorsey sat his horse at the edge of the property, still as a statue, watching the building. When he saw her, he touched his hat brim. "Mr. Dorsey," she called. For a moment, she thought he'd ride on. Then he turned the horse, came closer, though he didn't dismount. "Miss Bellamy!" "I wanted to thank you for last night and for—" She gestured vaguely, meaning the bundle, the thoughtfulness of it. "No need." "There's every need. You don't know me. I could be anyone, running from anything." He studied her from under his hat brim, this close. She could see his eyes were gray, like winter sky before snow. "Are you running from something?" "No, but you didn't know that." "Maybe not." He shifted in the saddle, leather creaking. "You settling in all right?" "Yes, Mrs. Garrett's been very kind." "She's good people." A pause. "You cook as good as the boys in town are saying." Lena felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I cook well enough. Been living on my own cooking for 5 years. That's about 4 years and 11 months too long." He seemed to consider something, then added, "My place is 3 miles north, where the valley narrows. Big barn, small house. You can't miss it." She waited, but he didn't say more. "Is that an invitation, Mr. Dorsey?" "It's information, Miss Bellamy." That ghost of a smile again. "What you do with it is your business." He turned the horse and rode off without another word. Lena stood there holding the empty wash basin, watching until he disappeared around the bend in the road. "That man," Mrs. Garrett said from the doorway, "says less in a day than most say in an hour, but when he does talk, it's worth listening to." 2 days passed in comfortable routine. Lena cooked, cleaned, mended. Word spread about her biscuits, her coffee, her way with simple food that made it taste like more than it was. The depot saw more business than usual, men finding excuses to stop by for a meal. On the 3rd morning, she woke to find snow falling thick and fast. By noon, the road was near impassable. No stages would run today, maybe not tomorrow either. "At least we're well supplied." "Mrs." Garrett said, looking out at the white world. "Though I worry about folks caught out in this, especially those living alone." Lena thought about a ranch 3 miles north, where the valley narrowed, about a man cooking for himself for 5 years. "Does Mr. Dorsey come to town often?" "Every week or two." "Why?" "Just wondering." She busied herself with a stew pot. "A man living alone, weather like this. Just wondering." "Mrs." Garrett gave her a knowing look, but said nothing. That night, the storm worsened. Wind howled around the corners of the building, found every crack and crevice. They kept both stoves burning high, but still the cold crept in. Near midnight, a pounding at the door woke them both. "Mrs." Garrett reached it first, yanked it open to reveal a snow-covered figure. "Lord have mercy," she exclaimed. "Get in here before you freeze solid." It was Sam Martinez, who worked the Hendricks spread east of town. He stomped snow from his boots, shivering violently. "Sorry to wake you, Mrs. Garrett. My horse went lame 2 miles back. I was heading home from town when the storm hit full." "Never mind that. Lena, get coffee brewing. Hot food, too." While Lena worked, she heard Sam talking, voice worried. "Saw Wyatt Dorsey's horse in town this morning, tied up at the docks, but that was before the storm hit bad. Don't know if he made it home." Lena's hand stilled on the coffee pot. "The doctors cut his hand pretty bad. Looked like wrapped up thick." Sam accepted the coffee gratefully. "That's a long ride in this weather with a hurt hand." "Mrs." Garrett caught Lena's eye. "He's ridden through worse," she said carefully. "Wyatt knows these trails better than anyone." But Lena heard the worry underneath the words. A cut hand, bad enough to need the doctor, in this cold, with the wind and snow. If he'd fallen from his horse, if the cut had made him weak. She served Sam his food, made sure he was settled by the stove. Then she pulled Mrs. Garrett aside. "That ranch of his, 3 miles north where the valley narrows, is the trail marked?" "Lena May Bellamy, you're not thinking what I think you're thinking." "Is it marked?" "Mrs." Garrett sighed. "Follow the main road north out of town. When you reach the big rock that looks like a bear sitting down, turn west. The trail's clear enough in good weather. In this..." She shook her head. "It's madness to try..." "Maybe?" Lena was already reaching for her coat. "But someone should check, make sure he made it home. And if he did, what then? You'll be stuck out at his place till the storm passes. People will talk." "Let them." She wrapped Mrs. Garrett's heavy shawl over her own thin one. "I've got food in the kitchen for tomorrow. Sam can help with the heavy work. I'll be back when I can." "This is foolishness," Mrs. Garrett said. But she was already pulling out an old pair of her late husband's boots. "These'll fit better than yours for walking in snow. And take the lantern from the storage room. The oil's fresh." The world outside was white and wild. Snow drove sideways, stinging exposed skin like needles. Lena pulled the shawl over her head, gripped the lantern tight, and started north. The first mile wasn't too bad. The buildings of town provided some shelter, and the road was worn deep enough to follow even in the snow. But once she passed the last house, the wind hit full force. It tried to push her back, tried to rip the lantern from her hand, tried to blind her with driven snow. She thought of turning back a dozen times. This was madness, like Mrs. Garrett said she didn't know this man, didn't know him anything that required freezing to death on a Wyoming road. But she thought of his quiet voice saying everybody ought to have someplace warm on a cold night. Thought of that careful bundle of necessary things. Thought of a cut hand and 5 years of cooking for himself. She pushed on. The bare rock loomed out of the snow like a giant shadow. She almost missed the turn, but the lantern light caught a fence post marking the trail, west, into the teeth of the wind. Time lost meaning. There was only the next step, the next breath, the circle of light from the lantern. Her feet went numb despite the borrowed boots. Her hands ached from gripping the lantern bale. The shawls grew heavy with snow. Then, like a miracle, she saw the light ahead, faint, filtered through the storm, but unmistakably the glow of windows. She stumbled toward it, found a gate, a path, a door. She didn't knock, couldn't have been heard over the wind anyway. She lifted the latch, fell inside, brought a swirl of snow with her. What in the name of... Wyatt Dorsey stood up from a chair by the fire, his right hand wrapped thick with bandages. His face went from surprise to something else. Something she couldn't read. Miss Bellamy. She pushed back the snow-covered shawls, tried to find words through chattering teeth. Heard you were hurt. The storm. Wanted to make sure. He crossed the room in 3 strides, took the lantern from her frozen fingers. You walked here in this? Someone had to check. Someone, he broke off, shook his head. Come on, you need to get warm. He led her to the fire, pulled a chair close. She sat because her legs wouldn't hold her anymore. He disappeared, came back with blankets, wrapped them around her, brought coffee, hot and strong, knelt to pull off the wet boots, matter of fact as if he undressed half-frozen women every day. Your hand, she said when she could speak without shaking. It's fine. Doc stitched it up. Just need to keep it clean. He sat back on his heels, looked up at her. You could have died out there. But I didn't. But you could have. For what? To check on a man you don't even know. She met his gray eyes steadily. You paid a week's room for a woman you didn't know. That's different. Is it? He had no answer for that. He stood, went to the stove, poured more coffee. She noticed he moved carefully, favoring the bandaged hand. When did you last eat? She asked. This morning, maybe. You need food, especially with an injury. I'm fine. She stood, letting the blankets fall. Where's your kitchen? Miss Bellamy. Where is it? He gestured toward a doorway. She found a kitchen that was clean, but bare. The kitchen of a man who ate to live rather than live to eat. But there were supplies enough. Flour, lard, salt pork, beans, preserved vegetables. She built up the fire in the cook stove, set water to heating, found a pot, started bean soaking, mixed biscuit dough one-handed while the other hand thawed. You should rest, he said from the doorway. I should cook. You should sit and keep that hand elevated. I've been taking care of myself for 5 years. And now you don't have to, just for tonight. He watched her work, silent. She could feel his eyes following her movements as she found what she needed, made do with what she didn't have. Simple food, but filling. The kind that would see a man through a long, cold night. When she set the plate in front of him, biscuits, beans with salt pork, canned peaches she'd found, he stared at it like he'd forgotten what real food looked like. Eat, she said. He ate slowly, carefully, like a man relearning something once familiar. She poured coffee, sat across from him with her own plate. They ate in silence, broken only by the wind outside and the pop of wood in the stove. Thank you, he said finally. You're welcome. I mean, for all of it. For checking on me. For the food. For not asking questions. Would you answer them if I did? That almost smile again? Probably not. Then I'll save my breath. She stood, started clearing plates. He moved to help, but she waved him off. You paid for a week's room and board. Consider this evening payment. That's not why I did it. I know. She pumped water into the basin, set it to heat. But it's why I'm doing this. While she washed dishes, he banked the fire, checked the windows, did the small chores of a house preparing for a long night. They worked around each other easily, as if they'd been doing it for years instead of minutes. When the kitchen was clean, she returned to the main room. He stood by the window, watching the storm. It won't let up before morning, he said. Maybe not even then. I know. You'll have to stay. I know that too. He turned to look at her. People will talk. Let them. It could harm your reputation. Mr. Dorsey. She met his gaze squarely. I'm 30 years old, unmarried, with no family and no prospects except what I make with my own hands. My reputation is worth exactly as much as my last meal cooked or my last seam sewn. I didn't walk 3 miles through a blizzard to protect something that won't keep me warm or fed. He studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded, as if she'd passed some test he hadn't even known he was giving. The bedroom's through there, he said, pointing. I'll take the chair by the fire. Your hand needs proper rest to heal. The chair's fine. She recognized the tone, the same one she'd used when insisting on cooking. There would be no arguing with it. All right, she said, but I'm getting up early to make breakfast. I'd expect nothing less. She paused at the bedroom door. Mr. Dorsey, why did you really pay for my room? He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, you stood on that platform with your head up and your back straight, even when you had every reason to crumble. Reminded me that just because something's broken doesn't mean it's beaten. She wanted to ask what was broken in him, but that would have been a question, and they weren't doing questions tonight. Good night, Mr. Dorsey. Wyatt, he said, just Wyatt. Good night, Wyatt. I'm Lena. Good night, Lena. She closed the door between them, but somehow the distance didn't feel like separation. It felt like promise. Like the first step on a trail that might lead somewhere neither of them expected, but both of them needed. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, a tall woman settled into bed while a quiet man kept watch by the fire, and neither of them slept as easy as they pretended, but both slept warmer for knowing the other was near. In the morning, there would be breakfast to cook and snow to clear and explanations to make or avoid. But for tonight, they were just two people who'd found shelter from more storms than just the one outside. And sometimes that was enough. The storm broke 2 days later, leaving the world buried under 3 feet of snow that sparkled like crushed glass in the sudden sunshine. Lena had spent those 2 days cooking, mending Wyatt's work shirts, and trying not to think about what would happen when the road cleared enough for her to return to town. Wyatt drove her back in his wagon, the horses picking their way carefully through the drifts. They didn't speak much. They'd found a comfortable silence during those snowbound days, working around each other with an ease that surprised them both. But as the buildings of Dusty Hollow came into view, Lena felt that comfort slipping away like snow off a roof. He stopped the wagon at the back door of the stage depot. I'll help you down, he said, but she was already climbing out on her own, boots crunching in the snow. Thank you for the ride, she said formally, as if she hadn't spent 2 nights under his roof, hadn't cooked his meals and mended his shirts and sat with him by the fire while the storm howled outside. He touched his hat brim. Ma'am. And that was that. He drove away, and she went inside to face Mrs. Garrett's knowing looks and pointed questions. 2 nights, the older woman said, arms crossed. You were gone 2 whole nights. The storm didn't break. You know that. I know that. You know that. But there's plenty in this town who'll enjoy speculating about what else might not have broken. Lena hung up her coat, tied on her apron. Let them speculate. I've got work to do. But Mrs. Garrett was right, of course. By noon, the whispers had started. Women who came for the stage leaned together over their coffee cups, eyes sliding toward Lena when they thought she wasn't looking. Men's conversations stopped when she entered the room, started again when she left. At the general store that afternoon, where she'd gone to buy flour, Mrs. Henderson from the church auxiliary made a point of drawing her skirts aside when Lena passed. Some people, she said to her companion, loud enough to carry, don't understand the importance of maintaining proper appearances. McCready, the store owner, at least had the grace to look embarrassed as he measured out her flour. Don't pay them no mind, Miss Bellamy. Folks always need something to jaw about. I'm not paying anyone any mind. Mr. McCready, just trying to buy flour. But it was harder to ignore at the butcher's shop, where Carl Bradley actually smirked as he wrapped her purchase. Heard you got caught in the storm out at the Dorsey place. Must have been quite cozy. Just the two of you. Lena met his eyes steadily. Mr. Dorsey was injured and needed help. I provided it, just as I'd hope any Christian person would do. Oh, I'm sure you provided all kinds of help. She picked up her package. The only help I provided was with cooking and keeping his wound clean. But I suppose that's less interesting to imagine than whatever story you're telling yourself. She left with her head high, but her hands were shaking as she walked back to the depot. This was what she'd feared, what she'd known would happen. A woman's reputation was like ice on a pond, one crack and the whole thing could shatter. At supper, even Sam Martinez, who she'd fed that stormy night, couldn't quite meet her eyes. The evening stage brought two traveling salesmen who'd clearly heard the gossip at their last stop. So you're the lady who got storm-stayed at that ranch north of town, one said with a grin that made her skin crawl. Bet that was an adventure. No adventure, Lena said evenly, pouring his coffee. Just snow and wind and making sure a man with an injured hand didn't get blood poisoning. Sure, that's all you were making sure of. Mrs. Garrett's sharp voice cut through. That's enough of that talk at my establishment. You'll show respect, or you'll find somewhere else to take your meal. The man subsided, but the damage was done. Lena escaped to the kitchen, hands tight on the edge of the wash basin. She was still standing there when Mrs. Garrett found her. It'll pass, the older woman said gently. These things always do. Next week someone else will do something worth gossiping about. Will it pass? I mean, Lena turned to face her. Or will I always be that woman who spent 2 nights alone with a man? You did nothing wrong. That's never mattered much when it comes to what people choose to believe. 3 days went by. The whispers didn't stop. If anything, they grew worse as the story spread and embellished itself. By the time it reached the saloon, she'd apparently thrown herself at Wyatt Dorsey in desperation, trapping him with the storm as an excuse. She was carrying water from the well Thursday morning when she heard horses, several riders coming down the main street, their voices carrying in the cold air. She recognized Tom Henley's laugh. He managed the Double Bar Ranch east of town and had a reputation for crude humor and wandering hands. Telling you, boys, that's one tall tree I wouldn't mind climbing, he was saying. Course, seems Dorsey already staked that claim. Don't know what he sees in her, another voice replied. Woman that tall ain't natural, like betting a scarecrow. Maybe that's what he likes. Heard those Alabama women are wild beneath all that proper talk. Lena's hands tightened on the water buckets. She could slip inside, avoid them entirely, but that would mean letting them drive her into hiding, and she'd done nothing to be ashamed of. She straightened her spine and continued toward the door just as the riders drew even with the depot. Tom Henley saw her first, his grin widening. Well, speak of the devil. Morning, Miss Bellamy. Heard you've been providing comfort to the local bachelors. I provide meals to paying customers. Mr. Henley. Nothing more. That's not what we heard. He swung down from his horse, moved closer. He was a big man, soft around the middle but still strong.
Heard you spent a couple cozy nights with Dorsey. Got us wondering if maybe you're looking to expand your customer base.
You heard wrong. Did I? He was close enough now that she could smell the whiskey on his breath from the night before. Seems to me a woman who'd walk through a blizzard to warm a man's bed might be interested in warmer arrangements. I've got money. More than Dorsey. That's certain. Step back, Mr. Henley.
Come on now, don't be unfriendly. I'm just trying to negotiate a fair price. What Dorsey pay, I'll double it.
The other men laughed. One called out, "Careful, Tom. She's big enough to break you in half." "I like him with some fight," Henley said, reaching out to touch her arm. Lena moved fast, bringing the full water bucket up and around. The water caught him full in the face, ice cold and shocking. He sputtered, stumbled back, cursing. "You little." "You'll want to think very carefully about your next words. Tom." Everyone turned. Wyatt Dorsey sat his horse at the corner of the building, still as stone except for the hand that rested on his saddle horn close to the rifle stock that jutted from its scabbard. Henley wiped water from his face, tried to salvage some dignity.
"Just having a conversation with the lady. Dorsey."
Didn't look like she was enjoying the conversation. Well, maybe she's particular about who she converses with. Seems she prefers them that live alone and convenient. Wyatt dismounted slowly, deliberately. He was taller than Henley, leaner, and there was something in the way he moved that made the other men shift nervously. "You've got something to say about Miss Bellamy. You say it to me." "Just repeating what the whole town's saying. She spent 2 nights at your place, alone. Don't take much imagination to figure what—" He never finished the sentence. Wyatt's fist caught him square in the mouth, sending him stumbling back into the muddy snow. Henley came up spitting blood, reaching for his gun, but froze when he found himself looking down the barrel of Wyatt's rifle drawn so fast most hadn't seen him move. "You pull that iron. It'll be the last mistake you make," Wyatt said quietly. Henley's hand moved away from his gun. "You can't threaten me for speaking the truth." "I'm not threatening you for speaking. I'm promising you consequences for lying." Wyatt's voice never rose, but somehow that made it more frightening. "Miss Bellamy came to my ranch in a blizzard because she heard I was injured. She could have frozen to death on that road, but she came anyway. She cooked, she cleaned. She made sure my hand didn't fester. And when the storm broke, I brought her back here. That's the truth. All of it. Anyone says different is a liar and a coward." He looked at each of the mounted men in turn. "That goes for all of you. I hear any man spreading filth about Miss Bellamy. We'll have a conversation, and it won't be with words." "You can't fight the whole town, Dorsey," one of the men said. "Don't have to. Just the fools who can't tell the difference between kindness and something else." He lowered the rifle but kept it ready. "Now get out of here before I decide you need a lesson in manners right now." Henley climbed to his feet, trying to maintain some swagger. "This ain't over." "It is unless you want to make it something more. Your choice." The men rode off, Henley holding a bandana to his bloody mouth. Wyatt watched them go, then turned to Lena. "You all right?" She realized she was shaking, but not from fear, from anger. "I had it handled." "I know you did. Saw the whole thing. That was a nice move with the water bucket." Despite everything, she almost smiled. Seemed appropriate. It was. He hesitated, then added, "I'm sorry, this is my fault. I should have thought how it would look. You staying at my place." "No." Her voice was firm. "It's not your fault. It's the fault of small minds with nothing better to do than create dirt where there isn't any. Still, if I'd brought you back that first morning. You had a fever starting. Did you know that your hand was infected? If I hadn't stayed to clean it proper and keep it dressed, you might have lost it. Or worse." She met his eyes. "I'd do it again, knowing exactly what people would say." He studied her for a long moment. "You would, wouldn't you?" "Every time. Mrs. Garrett appeared in the doorway. "You two planning to stand out here giving the gossips more fuel, or would you like to come inside?" They followed her in. She poured coffee, set it in front of them with the air of a general planning a campaign. "Well, that tears it," she said. "Wyatt, I know you meant well, but punching Tom Henley's just going to make them talk more." "Let them talk." "Easy for you to say. You live 3 miles out and don't need anyone's good opinion. Lena here has to make her living in this town." "I know." He turned to Lena. "That's why I came, to offer you a job." Both women stared at him. He continued, looking uncomfortable but determined. "My hand's healing, but it's still weak. I need help at the ranch cooking, some cleaning, maybe help with the lighter chores. I can't pay much, but there's the old foreman's cabin. It's small but solid, has its own stove. You'd have your own place, proper and respectable." "Wyatt Dorsey, Mrs.," Garrett said slowly. "Are you offering to hire Lena as your housekeeper? Ranch cook and general help. And before anyone says anything, I've got 2 hands who come by daily to help with the cattle. Jim Santos and his son Pete. They'd be around as chaperones or witnesses or whatever people need to stop flapping their gums." Lena set down her coffee cup carefully. "You don't need a cook." "Don't I? You saw how I was living? And winter's not half done. Gets harder to manage everything alone when the real cold sets in. This is because of what just happened. You feel responsible. This is because I'm tired of burned beans in my own company." He paused, then added more quietly, "And because you make the best biscuits I've ever eaten." "That's not a reason to hire someone." "It is if you haven't had a decent meal in 5 years. They looked at each other across the table. "Mrs." Garrett cleared her throat. "It's a respectable offer," she said to Lena. "Housekeeping positions are proper employment. With the hands around during the day, no one could say anything." "They'll say it anyway," Lena pointed out. "Maybe, but let them try saying it when you're earning honest wages for honest work." "Mrs." Garrett refilled their cups. "Besides, might do Wyatt good to have someone around who'll make sure he eats regular and doesn't work himself into an early grave." "I'm sitting right here," Wyatt said mildly. "I know. That's why I'm saying it." Lena turned the offer over in her mind. It would mean leaving the relative safety of the depot, where Mrs. Garrett provided buffer and support. It would mean more isolation, more dependence on one person's goodwill. But it would also mean steady work, her own space. And though she tried not to think too hard about this more time in the company of a man who defended her honor with his fists and spoke of her kindness as something worth protecting. "Can I see the cabin first?" she asked. Something in Wyatt's face lightened. "We can go now if you like. I brought the wagon." And that was how Lena found herself once again traveling the road north, this time with half the town watching from windows and doorways. She sat properly on the wagon seat, hands folded, looking neither right nor left. Let them look. Let them talk. She had work to do. The cabin was better than she'd expected, one room with a good stove, solid walls, a small window facing east for morning light. It sat 50 yards from the main house, connected by a covered walkway for bad weather, close enough for convenience, far enough for propriety. Previous foreman built it for his mother when she came to live with him. Wyatt explained. She liked her privacy, said a woman needed her own space to think. Smart woman. Would $30 a month plus the cabin and meals be fair? It was more than fair. It was generous. When would you need me to start? Whenever you're ready. Tomorrow. Next week. Spring. That almost smile. Though I'd appreciate it being before spring. Man can only eat so many burned beans. Monday, she decided. I'll come Monday. They shook hands on it. Formal as any business deal. His hand was warm, calloused, careful around hers. On the ride back to town, he said, they're still going to talk. I know. Does it bother you? She thought about it. What bothers me is the assumption that a man and woman can't work together without it meaning something improper. What bothers me is that kindness gets twisted into scandal. But the talk itself, she shrugged. I've been talked about before. I survived. What happened before? She glanced at him. I thought we didn't ask questions. We don't, I'm sorry. Don't be. It's a fair question. She watched the snowy landscape pass. I was engaged once, back in Alabama. He decided he preferred my younger cousin after I'd already made my wedding dress. The whole county had opinions about that, about what I must have done wrong to drive him away. What did you do? I sold the dress, bought a train ticket, and left, let them talk to empty air. And now they're talking again. Different town, same small minds. She straightened her shoulders. But this time, I've got work to do. Good work. Honest work. That's all that matters. He dropped her at the depot as the sun was setting. As she climbed down, he said, Lena, thank you for taking the job, for all of it. Thank you for offering it. She went inside to face Mrs. Garrett's questions and to start packing her few belongings. Behind her, she heard the wagon roll away, taking with it a man who'd proven that sometimes action spoke louder than words, and that defending someone's honor might be the most honest conversation of all. Monday would come soon enough, and with it, a new chapter in a story that the town thought it already knew the ending to. But Lena had learned long ago that other people's assumptions were just that, assumptions. The truth was what you lived, not what others said about you. And she intended to live her truth one honest day at a time. Winter settled over the ranch like a heavy quilt, muffling sound and slowing time. Lena had been working for Wyatt for 3 weeks now, and they'd fallen into a routine as comfortable as worn boots. She rose before dawn to start breakfast. He handled the early morning cattle work, and they met at the kitchen table as the sun painted the mountains pink. The Santos men arrived each day just after breakfast, Jim, weathered and reliable, and his son Pete, barely 20 and eager to prove himself. Their presence satisfied propriety. But more than that, they brought warmth and conversation to days that might otherwise have been too quiet. Miss Lena, Jim said one morning, warming his hands around his coffee cup. I've got to tell you, this is the first winter Wyatt's looked healthy. Usually by now he's thin as a fence post from living on his own cooking. I don't do anything special, Lena said, setting a plate of hotcakes in front of him. Just regular food. Regular food that's actually cooked, Pete added with a grin. Last year I caught him eating beans straight from the can. In January, cold. That's enough of that, Wyatt said mildly from his place at the table. But Lena noticed he didn't deny it. The work was hard but satisfying. Beyond cooking 3 meals a day, there was bread to bake, clothes to mend, the vegetable cellar to organize, and 100 small tasks that had gone undone in a house managed by a man alone. She found curtains packed away in a trunk, washed and hung them, discovered a set of blue dishes wrapped in paper, clearly unused, and put them into service despite Wyatt's protest that the tin plates were fine. These were your wife's, she said. It wasn't a question. He stood in the doorway, watching her arrange the dishes in the cupboard. I packed them away after. They're meant to be used. Beautiful things shouldn't be hidden away just because they carry memories. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, Sarah would have agreed with you. It was the first time he'd said his wife's name aloud in her presence. That afternoon, she found him in the barn, mending harness. The Santos men had gone home early. Jim's wife was feeling poorly. Lena brought coffee and sat on a hay bale nearby, working on darning his socks. You don't have to do that out here, he said. It's warmer in the house. I like the company. They worked in companionable silence. Finally, he said, can I ask you something? We don't ask questions. Remember? Maybe it's time we did. He set down the harness. Why did you really come check on me that night in the storm? She considered her answer.
Because you looked at me like I was a person, not a problem to be solved or an opportunity to be taken. Do you know how rare that is?
Is it?
For a woman like me, yes.
She knotted her thread. Cut it clean. I'm too tall, too old, too set in my ways. I don't simper or flutter or need rescuing. Most men don't know what to do with that. Maybe most men are fools.
She looked up at him. Maybe they are.
Their eyes met and held. Something passed between them, unnamed but unmistakable. Then he picked up the harness again, and she reached for another sock, and the moment passed, but it left something changed in its wake. The following week brought an unexpected test. Lena had gone to town for supplies, driving the wagon herself despite Wyatt's offer to accompany her. She needed to face the gossips on her own terms, needed to show them she wasn't hiding. At the general store, she selected her purchases with care, ignoring the whispers that followed her. McCready helped her load the wagon, shooting dark looks at anyone who stared too long. She was arranging the supplies in the wagon bed when she heard a familiar voice.
Well, if it isn't the famous Miss Bellamy.
She turned to find Tom Henley standing there, his split lip still healing from Wyatt's fist. He wasn't alone. 3 of his ranch hands flanked him, trying to look menacing.
Mr. Henley, she said evenly. I'd heard you were laid up with injury.
Takes more than a sucker punch to keep me down. He moved closer.
Heard you're playing house with Dorsey now.
Proper employment, they say. We all know what kind of employment a woman provides in a lonely man's house. I cook and clean for wages. Mr. Henley, the same work I did at the stage depot. Sure you do. Just cooking and cleaning. His smile was ugly. Tell me, does he pay extra for the night work, or is that included in your arrangement? One of his men snickered. Lena felt heat rise in her face, but she kept her voice steady. The only arrangement, Mr. Dorsey and I have is a fair wage for honest work. I'm sorry if that's too complicated for you to understand.
Oh, I understand plenty.
I understand a woman who throws herself at the first man to show interest. I understand a man so desperate he'll take any female willing to... Willing to what, Tom? They all turned. Wyatt stood at the corner of the building, and he wasn't alone. Jim and Pete Santos flanked him, and behind them stood several other men ranchers and townsmen who did business with Wyatt.
Just having a conversation,
Henley said, but his bravado was slipping.
Sounded like harassment to me,
said George Paulson, who owned the feed store.
The lady's trying to do her shopping in peace.
Since when is speaking the truth harassment? Since when is spreading lies the truth? Old Sam Martinez stepped forward. I was at the depot the night Miss Bellamy walked through a blizzard to check on an injured man. That took courage most men don't have, including you, Tom. You taking her side now?
I'm taking the side of decency, Sam said, something you might try sometime.
Wyatt moved past them all, went straight to Lena. You ready to head back? Almost, just need to pick up the flour.
I'll get it.
He touched her elbow, gentle.
Why don't you wait in the wagon?
She wanted to argue, wanted to stand her ground, but she saw the wisdom in his suggestion. Her presence was just giving Henley more fuel. As she climbed onto the wagon seat, she heard George Paulson say, Tom, you might want to consider that Miss Bellamy has more friends in this town than you think, and Wyatt's not the only one tired of your mouth. The ride back to the ranch was quiet. Wyatt drove, his jaw tight.
Finally,
Lena said.
You didn't need to come?
Jim saw Henley and his boys heading for town. Thought you might need backup. I can handle Tom Henley.
I know you can.
That doesn't mean you should have to. He glanced at her. How often has he bothered you? This was the second time. There won't be a third. The certainty in his voice should have worried her. Instead, she found it oddly comforting. What did you do? Nothing, yet, but George Paulson owns the mortgage on Henley's ranch, and Paulson doesn't like men who harass women. Funny how financial pressure can improve a man's manners.
You arranged that.
I mentioned to George that Henley was making trouble. George drew his own conclusions. They pulled into the ranch yard, as Wyatt helped her down from the wagon. His hands lingered on her waist a moment longer than necessary. "I'm sorry," he said. "This is my fault. Hiring you, bringing you out here. I've made things worse for you." "No." She stepped back, met his eyes. "You've given me work and a safe place to live. What other people choose to think or say, that's on them, not you." "Still." "Wyatt?" She rarely used his given name, and it stopped him mid-sentence. "I'm not some delicate flower that needs protecting. I've been taking care of myself for a long time, but I appreciate the backup, and the friends I didn't know I had." That almost smile appeared. "You have more friends than you know. Mrs. Garrett's been singing your praises to anyone who'll listen. Says the depot hasn't run as smooth since you left." "And Mrs. Garrett's good people." "She is, and she's not the only one who sees your worth." There was something in his voice, his eyes, that made her breath catch. But before she could respond, Pete Santos came out of the barn, and the moment was lost to the business of unloading supplies and preparing supper. That evening, after the Santos men had gone home, Lena was closing up the kitchen when Wyatt appeared in the doorway. "I've been thinking," he said. "Dangerous habit." He smiled, a real smile this time, not the ghost of one. "Maybe, but I think it's time we stop pretending." "Pretending what?" "That this is just about cooking and cleaning. That I hired you because I needed help with housework." Her hands stilled on the dish towel. "Why did you hire me?" He came into the kitchen, stood across the table from her. "Because I couldn't stop thinking about a woman brave enough to walk through a blizzard for a stranger. Because you look at me like I'm whole, not broken. Because for the first time in 5 years, this house feels like a home instead of a place to sleep." "Wyatt, I'm not asking for anything," he said quickly. "I know you've got no reason to trust my intentions. I know what people are saying, and the last thing I want is to prove them right, but I thought you should know. You deserve the truth." She set down the towel, came around the table. He watched her approach, tension in every line of his body. "You want the truth," she said. "The truth is, I knew exactly what people would say when I took this job. I knew they'd assume the worst, and I came anyway." "Why?" "Because you're the first man in years who's looked at me and seen something other than a problem or an opportunity. Because you make me feel like myself instead of some role I'm supposed to play. Because—" She stopped, gathered courage. "Because I couldn't stop thinking about you either." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, his hand cupped her cheek, thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "What do we do now?" he asked. "We do what we've been doing. You run your ranch. I cook and keep house. We let people think what they want." She covered his hand with hers. "But maybe we stop pretending with each other." "I'd like that." "So would I." He leaned down. She stretched up, and their lips met in a kiss that was gentle and sure and full of promise. When they pulled apart, both were breathing unsteadily. "I should go," she said. "The cabin is cold and lonely and 50 yards too far away." He caught himself. "But you're right. Propriety." "For now." She touched his face, memorizing the feel of stubble under her palm. "But spring will come. Things change." "Yes," he agreed. "They do." She walked to her cabin through the cold night air, but she barely felt it behind her. She knew he stood in the doorway watching, making sure she got safely inside. In the morning, they'd share breakfast and careful conversation, maintaining the proper distance while Jim and Pete were around. But underneath would run this new current of understanding, of possibility. Let the town talk. Let them assume and gossip and judge. They had no idea what really existed between the tall woman from Alabama and the quiet rancher who'd hired her. They saw scandal where there was tenderness, impropriety where there was deep respect. But then, Small minds often missed the bigger picture, and the picture being painted here stroke by careful stroke was of two people finding their way back from loneliness, one shared meal at a time. Spring would come, and with it, changes that would give the gossip something real to talk about. But for now, there was winter work to do, and the sweet secret of knowing that home was more than a place. It was the person who made you want to stay. The storm came out of nowhere on a March evening, just as the first hints of spring were beginning to show in the valley. Lena had noticed the signs earlier, the restless behavior of the cattle, the way the mountains disappeared behind a wall of clouds, but she'd thought they had more time. She was wrong. The wind hit like a physical blow, rattling the windows of the main house where she was finishing the supper dishes. Through the kitchen window, she could see Wyatt and the Santos men struggling to get the last of the cattle into the near pasture. By the time the men stumbled through the door, they were coated in snow and shaking with cold. Pete's lips were nearly blue. "Get those wet clothes off," Lena ordered, already pulling blankets from the chest. "Jim, Pete, there's dry things in the back room Wyatt keeps spares. Move now, before you catch your death." While the men changed, she stoked the fire higher and put coffee on to boil. The wind screamed around the corners of the house, finding every crack and crevice. This wasn't like the storm that had brought her here months ago. This had the feeling of winter's last violent gasp, desperate and dangerous. "We need to get home," Jim said when he emerged in dry clothes. "Maria will be worried sick." Wyatt shook his head. "Not in this. You'd never make it 2 miles. But your wife would rather have you alive tomorrow than frozen tonight." He turned to Lena. "We'll need bedding for the front room. They can bunk by the fire." She was already moving, gathering quilts and pillows. As she worked, she became aware of a new sound beneath the wind, a groaning, creaking noise from above. Wyatt heard it too. His face went tight. "The roof! Too much snow too fast!" They all looked up as the groaning intensified. Then, with a sound like thunder, part of the kitchen roof gave way. Snow and broken timber crashed down, missing Lena by inches. Cold air and snow swirled through the gaping hole. "Everyone out!" Wyatt shouted. "Into the parlor, now!" They grabbed what they could, blankets, the coffee pot, the remains of supper, and crowded into the front parlor. Wyatt slammed the door against the kitchen, but they could hear the continuing destruction as more of the roof collapsed. "Well," Jim said into the sudden quiet, "this is a fine mess." Pete laughed shakily. "At least we're all in one piece." "For now," his father said. "But this room won't hold heat with the rest of the house open to the storm. We'll need to keep that fire going high all night." They arranged themselves as comfortably as possible, the 2 Santos men on makeshift beds near the hearth, Wyatt in the chair he always favored, and Lena on the small settee. Nobody suggested she go to her cabin. In weather like this, 50 yards might as well be 50 miles. As the night wore on, the storm intensified. The parlor, despite the roaring fire, grew steadily colder. Ice formed on the inside of the windows. Their breath came in visible puffs. "We need more wood," Wyatt said around midnight. The wood box was nearly empty. "Wood piles by the kitchen door," Jim pointed out. "Might as well be on the moon." "There's some in the barn," Pete offered. "If you can find the barn in this—" Wyatt stood, reached for his coat. "I'll go." "Like hell you will." Lena stood too. "You don't know where anything is in that barn. I reorganized it last week." "You're not going out there." "Neither are you. We'll go together or not at all." They stared at each other. Stubborn meeting, stubborn. Finally, Jim said, "Take the rope from the wall there. Tie yourselves together and to the porch post. It's the only way." It was madness, but it was necessary. Without wood, they'd freeze before morning. They wrapped themselves in whatever they could find, tied the rope around their waists with Jim's expert knots. Wyatt went first, Lena close behind. The moment they stepped outside, the wind tried to tear them apart. She couldn't see him even though he was only feet away. The world was white and screaming chaos. They felt their way along the wall, found the corner, followed it to where the barn should be, by pure luck or instinct. Wyatt's outstretched hand hit the barn door. Inside was marginally better, still cold enough to freeze breath, but at least out of the direct wind. Lena fumbled in the darkness, found the woodpile by memory. "Here!" she shouted over the storm. "Help me load!" They filled their arms with as much as they could carry. The journey back was worse, fighting against the wind now. Wood making them clumsy, rope their only guide to safety. When they finally stumbled back through the parlor door, Jim and Pete pulled them in like landing fish. Ice covered their coats, their scarves, their eyelashes. "Never again," Wyatt gasped. "We make this last till dawn or we burn furniture." Lena couldn't answer. Her teeth were chattering too hard. Pete helped her out of the frozen outer layers while Jim fed the fire with their hard-won wood. Slowly, painfully, feeling returned to her fingers and toes. "That was brave," Jim said quietly. "Foolish, but brave." "Seems to be a habit of mine," Lena managed, walking through storms. Wyatt, warming his hands by the fire, looked at her across the room. Something passed between them, memory of another storm, another night, another risk taken. They settled back into their makeshift camp. The wind still raged, the house groaned and settled, but they had warmth and light and each other's company. "Reminds me of the winter of 81 inches, Jim said, feeding the fire carefully. "Got caught in a storm in the mountains. 5 of us holed up in a line shack for 3 days. Like to drove each other crazy." "What did you do?" Pete asked. "Told stories. Played cards with a deck missing half its numbers. Mostly tried not to kill each other." He grinned. "Course, we didn't have Miss Lena's cooking. Just hardtack and jerky." "Speaking of food," Lena said, "is anyone else hungry? I salvaged the cornbread and some stew." They ate cold cornbread and lukewarm stew and called it a feast. As they ate, the stories continued Jim's adventures from his younger days, Pete's dreams of having his own spread someday, even Wyatt contributing a few tales from his early years learning the cattle business. "What about you, Miss Lena?" Pete asked. "You must have stories from Alabama." She considered. "Nothing as exciting as cattle drives and line shacks. Just ordinary life in an ordinary town." "Come now," Jim encouraged. "Everyone's got at least one good story." "Well," she set down her cup, "there was the time my mama and I got hired to cook for a wedding 300 guests. Fancy as you please. Everything that could go wrong did. The stove wouldn't draw right, the help didn't show, and then the bride's mother decided at the last minute she wanted completely different food." "What did you do?" Pete asked, enthralled. "We cooked like our lives depended on it. Mama handled the stove, sweet-talked it like an ornery mule until it behaved. I ran between the kitchen and the church hall so many times I wore holes in my shoes. And when the bride's mother started fussing, Mama just smiled sweet as pie and said, 'Mrs. Ashford, you can have what you ordered or you can have what we're cooking, but you can't have both unless you'd like to explain to 300 guests why there's no food at all.'" The men laughed. "Did it work?" Wyatt asked. "It did. And you know what? Nobody remembered the near disasters. They just remembered it was the best wedding feast in county history. Mama always said that's the secret, not that things go perfect, but that you handle the imperfect with grace." "Wise woman," Jim said. "She was." Lena smiled at the memory. "She'd have liked this making do, keeping spirits up. She always said the best times were the ones that tested you a little." "This is testing us more than a little," Pete pointed out, as another gust of wind shook the house. "Then it'll be an even better story later," Lena said. The night wore on. They took turns tending the fire, dozed when they could, sometime near dawn. Lena woke to find Wyatt sitting beside her on the settee, a blanket draped over both of them. "How's the storm?" she whispered. "Dying down. We'll make it to morning." She should have moved away, minded the propriety of the situation, But Jim and Pete were asleep, the fire was warm, and Wyatt's shoulder was solid beside hers.
"Are you ever sorry?"
she asked quietly. "That you hired me, it's brought you nothing but trouble." He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then,
"The only thing I'm sorry about is that I can't court you proper, that I can't take you to dances or socials without people talking,
that I have to pretend you're just an employee when you're so much more." Her heart stuttered.
"Wyatt."
"I know, not the time or place, but lying here, thinking we might not make it through the night. I needed you to know. Whatever happens, I'm not sorry you're here. I'm grateful. Every day." She found his hand under the blanket, laced her fingers with his. "I'm not sorry either." They sat like that, hands clasped hidden beneath wool, watching the fire and waiting for dawn. When it came pale and welcome through the ice-covered windows, they were still there, still connected. Jim stirred first, sat up with a groan. "Well, we survived."
"Looks like—"
Wyatt stood, reluctantly releasing Lena's hand.
"Let's see what's left of my house."
The damage was worse in daylight. Half the kitchen roof was gone. Snow piled high on what had been the floor. The cold had already frozen the water in the pipes. "It'll take weeks to fix," Jim said, surveying the destruction.
"You can't stay here, Wyatt."
"I'll manage." "No," Lena's voice was firm. "You'll stay in the foreman's cabin. It's small but intact. I'll take the room here by the parlor. It's far enough from the damage to be safe. I'm not putting you out of your home. It's not my home. It's my workplace. And I can't work if the owner freezes to death out of stubbornness." Jim and Pete exchanged glances. "She's got a point," Jim said carefully. "And with you in the cabin and her here, well, it's still proper, more or less." It took more arguing, but eventually, logic won. They spent the morning moving essentials, boarding up what they could, salvaging what was salvageable. Tom Henley showed up around noon, ostensibly to check on storm damage, but really to gloat. His smirk when he saw the destroyed kitchen was insufferable. "Shame about your roof. Dorsey, course, that's what comes of not maintaining property proper." The roof was sound. Wyatt said evenly, "This storm would have tested any building."
"Maybe. Still, if you need help rebuilding—"
Henley's eyes found Lena. "Though I hear you've already got all the help you can handle." "We're managing fine," Lena said. "I bet you are. Cozy arrangement. You here and him in the cabin. Or is it the other way around now?" The implications in his tone were clear. Before anyone could respond, Pete stepped forward. "Mr. Henley, my PA and I were here all night. We all stayed in the parlor together, keeping warm and keeping proper. Anyone saying different is calling us liars." Jim moved to stand beside his son. "That's right, and we Santos men don't take kindly to being called liars." Henley's smirk faltered. The Santos family was well respected, their word golden in the community. "I wasn't suggesting." "Sure sounded like you were." Jim's voice was steel. "Maybe you should think harder before you speak. Words have consequences." "And sometimes those consequences involve more than words," Wyatt added quietly. Henley looked between the three men, calculated odds, and decided retreat was the better option. "Just came to check on neighbors. Glad you're all safe." After he left, Pete spat in the snow. "Jackass!" "Pete," Jim scolded, then added, "but accurate." That evening, after the Santos men had gone home to reassure their family, Lena and Wyatt sat in the damaged kitchen, planning repairs. "We'll need to order lumber from Denver," Wyatt was saying. "It'll take time, but—"
"Do you ever wonder if it's worth it?"
Lena interrupted. "Fighting them all the time, the Tom Henleys of the world." He set down his pencil. "You thinking of leaving?" "No, I'm thinking of staying. But I wonder sometimes if we're making things harder than they need to be." "How so?" She took a breath. "People talk because they think we're doing improper things while pretending otherwise. But what if we stopped pretending? What if we were just honest about—" She gestured between them.
This?
"You mean court openly? I mean, stop acting like I'm just your housekeeper when everyone can see it's more. Stop letting their whispers dictate how we live." He leaned back in his chair, studied her.
That's a big step.
"Is it? We've already taken the biggest step finding each other. Everything else is just details. Details that could affect your reputation, your standing in town." "My reputation is already affected. My standing is what I make it." She met his eyes. "I'm tired of caring what small minds think. Aren't you?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he stood, came around the table, knelt beside her chair so they were eye level. "Lena May Bellamy, would you do me the honor of allowing me to court you properly and publicly, with Sunday drives and church socials and all the gossip that comes with it?" Despite everything, the ruined kitchen, the hard night, the uncertain future, she smiled. "I thought you'd never ask." He kissed her then, there in the wreckage of the storm, and it felt like the sun coming up after the longest night. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. "They'll talk," he warned. "Let them. We've survived worse storms than gossip." And they had. The storm that brought them together. The storm of public opinion, and now this literal storm that had tested their resolve. Each one had made them stronger, more certain of what they were building together. Spring was coming, and with it the promise of renewal. The roof would be repaired, the damage undone, and if the good people of Dusty Hollow wanted something to talk about, well, Lena and Wyatt would give them something worth discussing, a courtship built on mutual respect, tested by adversity, and strong enough to weather any storm. Let them talk. Sometimes the best response to whispers was to speak your truth loud and clear. The spring market fair came to Dusty Hollow in early May, bringing merchants, livestock traders, and entertainment from as far as Denver. The main street transformed with colorful bunting, temporary stalls, and the smells of roasted corn and fresh bread. It was the social event of the season, where ranchers made deals. Wives showed off new dresses, and young people stole moments of courtship between the dancing and games. Lena stood before the small mirror in her cabin, smoothing the skirt of her best dress, a deep blue cotton that brought out the color in her eyes. She'd added new lace to the collar and cuffs, small touches that made it feel fresh for the occasion. "You look fine," she told her reflection, then laughed at herself. When had she become a woman who fussed over her appearance? A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Wyatt stood on the threshold, dressed in his Sunday clothes, dark trousers, white shirt, string tie. He'd even visited the barber, his usually unruly hair neatly trimmed. "You're early," she said. "Wanted to beat the crowds." He looked her over, and something warm kindled in his eyes. "You look beautiful." "It's the same dress I wear to church." "No, it's not. You've done something different." He tilted his head. "The lace." That he'd noticed such a small detail made her cheeks warm. "Mrs. Garrett gave it to me. Said a woman being courted properly deserved a bit of finery." "Mrs. Garrett's a wise woman." He offered his arm. "Shall we?" The ride to town was pleasant, the morning air sweet with wildflowers. They talked of ordinary things, the progress on the roof repairs, the new calves, plans for summer planting. But underneath ran a current of anticipation. This would be their first real public appearance as a courting couple since Wyatt had asked permission 2 weeks ago. They'd attended church together last Sunday, sat in the same pew, weathered the stares and whispers, but a market fair was different, more social, more visible, more chance for either support or censure. "Nervous?" Wyatt asked as they reached the edge of town. "A little. You?" "Terrified." But he was smiling. "Been 5 years since I escorted a lady to a social event. Might have forgotten how." "I doubt that." She touched his hand on the reins. "Besides, I'm not much for being escorted. I prefer walking alongside. Another thing I like about you." They left the wagon at the livery and entered the fair proper. The transformation of the usually quiet street was remarkable. Music drifted from a small stage where a brass band played. Children ran between the stalls, sticky with candy. The smell of grilled meat and baked goods filled the air. Wyatt, Miss Lena. Pete Santos appeared from the crowd, grinning wide. Pa's over at the livestock pens. Said to tell you that bull you were asking about is here from the Morrison Ranch. I'll look later, Wyatt said. Right now. I promised Miss Bellamy a tour of the fair. Pete's grin widened. About time you two stopped dancing around it. Ma's been saying for weeks you were sweet on each other. Your mother's too perceptive for her own good, Lena said, but she was smiling. They wandered through the stalls, Wyatt buying her a bag of roasted almonds despite her protests that she didn't need treating like a child at her first fair. They watched a demonstration of rope tricks, examined quilts at the church lady's booth, and listened to a medicine man hawk his wares with elaborate promises. At the baked goods competition, they found Mrs. Garrett presiding as a judge. She beamed when she saw them. Well, if it isn't my favorite couple, Lena, you should have entered your apple pie. Would have won for certain. I've been a bit busy with roof repairs, Lena said dryly. I heard about that. Storm damage all over the valley, but you're managing. We're managing fine, Wyatt said, though we coming natural as breathing. They were examining preserves at another stall when trouble arrived in the form of John Morrison from Texas. He was new to the area, had bought the old Hendricks spread, and had money to throw around. He was also unmarried, handsome in a flashy way, and had been making his interest in the local ladies known. Dorsey, he said, tipping his hat, his eyes fixed on Lena with obvious appreciation. And this must be the famous Miss Bellamy. I've heard so much about you. Mr. Morrison, Lena acknowledged coolly. Please, call me John. I feel we're going to be great friends. He smiled, all teeth and charm. I understand you're quite the cook. I'm in desperate need of someone to manage my household. The position would pay very well double whatever Dorsey here is paying. The presumption of it approaching another man's employee right in front of him made several nearby people stop and stare. Wyatt's jaw tightened, but Lena spoke before he could. That's kind of you, Mr. Morrison, but I'm quite satisfied with my current position. Are you working way out there, isolated, with only cattle and cowboys for company? A woman like you deserves better. My ranch is closer to town, more social opportunities, and I'd treat you like the lady you are, not like hired help. Mr. Dorsey treats me with complete respect, Lena said, edge creeping into her voice. Does he taking you to a fair doesn't erase months of... Morrison paused, smiled. Well, we all know what people say about your arrangement. What people say and what's true are often different things, Wyatt said quietly. Indeed, though sometimes they align perfectly. Morrison turned back to Lena. My offer stands. When you tire of playing house with a man who can't even maintain a proper roof over your head, come see me. I'll show you how a real gentleman treats a lady. He walked away before either could respond. Around them, the crowd suddenly found other things to look at, though Lena could feel their curiosity like heat on her skin. I need some air, she said. They found a quiet spot behind the church, away from the crowds. Lena sank onto a bench, hands clenched in her lap. He had no right, Wyatt said, pacing, acting like you're some kind of commodity to be bought. He had every right. Her voice was tired. That's what I am to men like him. Hired help. Someone to cook and clean and be grateful for whatever scraps of respect they choose to throw. You know that's not what you are to me. I know. She looked up at him. But knowing it and having the world acknowledge it are different things. He can say those things because in everyone's eyes, I'm just your housekeeper. Wyatt stopped pacing, stood before her. Then let's change what they see. How? He was quiet for a moment, then sat beside her on the bench. Marry me, The words hung in the air between them. Lena's breath caught. What?
Marry me. Not someday. Not after a proper courtship period. Soon. Let them see you as my wife, not my employee. Let men like Morrison know exactly where we stand.
You can't propose just to spite John Morrison. I'm not. He took her hands. I'm proposing because I love you. Because these past months have shown me what life can be when you share it with the right person.
Because I'm tired of pretending you don't already own my heart.
Wyatt.
I know it's fast. I know people will say we're proving their gossip right. I don't care. Do you?
She looked at their joined hands, his rough from work, hers strong and capable. Thought about the months of shared meals and comfortable silences, the storms weathered, literal and figurative, the way he looked at her like she was precious, the way she felt when he smiled. No, she said softly.
I don't care what they say.
Is that a yes?
That's a yes.
He kissed her there behind the church, and if anyone saw, neither noticed nor cared. They returned to the fair different than they'd left, still arm in arm, but with a new certainty in their step. The first person they encountered was Jim Santos at the livestock pens. Jim, Wyatt said.
I'd like you to meet my fiancée, Miss Bellamy.
Jim's weathered face split into a huge grin. About damn time, pardon my language. Miss Lena. Maria's going to be beside herself with joy. When's the wedding?
Soon,
Lena said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice.
Very soon.
Word spread through the fair like wildfire. By the time they reached the baked goods tent again, Mrs. Garrett was waiting with tears in her eyes.
Oh, my dear girl,
she said, embracing Lena.
I'm so happy for you both.
Not everyone was pleased. Lena caught the sour looks from some of the church ladies, heard the muttered comments about unseemly haste and proving rumors true, but for every disapproving face, there was a warm smile from people like the Santos family, like George Paulson, who shook Wyatt's hand heartily, like old Sam Martinez, who winked at Lena and said, "Good thing you're making an honest man of him." They encountered John Morrison again near the dance platform. His handsome face was less friendly now.
Heard the news, he said. Quite sudden, isn't it?
Not really. Wyatt replied, We've been moving toward this since the day we met.
How romantic and convenient. Solves all those nasty rumors, doesn't it?
Lena stepped forward. Mr. Morrison, I appreciate your earlier offer, but as you can see, my future is quite settled. I hope you find someone else to manage your household.
Oh, I will. Someone younger, perhaps more accommodating.
The insult was clear. Before Wyatt could react, Lena laughed a genuine, delighted sound that made heads turn.
Younger and more accommodating. She repeated, Yes, that sounds perfect for you. Someone who won't see through your charm to the smallness underneath. Good luck with that search.
Morrison's face flushed red, but Lena had already turned away, drawing Wyatt with her toward the dance platform where couples were forming for a reel. Dance with me, she said.
Lena, you don't have to prove anything.
I'm not proving anything. I'm celebrating. Dance with your fiancé, Mr. Dorsey. They joined the line of couples. The music started, bright and lively. Lena had worried she'd forgotten the steps. It had been years since she'd danced at a social event, but her feet remembered. More importantly, Wyatt was there, steady and sure, catching her when the dance brought them together, matching her step for step.
People are staring,
he murmured during a turn. Let them. For once, they're seeing the truth instead of their imaginings. They danced 3 dances in a row, until they were breathless and laughing. Other couples smiled at them, the young love, even if neither was particularly young. The joy infectious. Even some of the disapproving faces softened. During a break in the music, Tom Henley appeared. Lena tensed, but his expression was subdued, almost sheepish. Dorsey, Miss Bellamy. He shifted his feet. Heard congratulations are in order. Thank you, Wyatt said carefully. Henley cleared his throat. I owe you both an apology. For things I've said, it wasn't right. Lena blinked in surprise. What brought this change of heart? Henley's face reddened. My wife. When she heard what I'd been saying about you, Miss Bellamy, she gave me what for like you wouldn't believe. Said any woman brave enough to walk through a blizzard to help an injured man was worth 10 of me. She was right. He offered his hand to Wyatt, who, after a moment's hesitation, shook it. Then Henley tipped his hat to Lena and disappeared back into the crowd. Will wonders never cease, Lena murmured. Maybe there's hope for this town yet, Wyatt agreed. The fair continued around them, music and laughter, deals made and gossip shared. But for Lena and Wyatt, it had become something else, a beginning. Not of their relationship that had started months ago in a depot during a storm, but of their public life together, their willingness to claim their happiness despite others' opinions. As the sun began to sink toward the mountains, Wyatt bought her a ridiculous hair ribbon from a traveling merchant, bright yellow silk that cost too much and matched nothing she owned. It's beautiful, she said, laughing, and completely impractical. Just like getting engaged at a market fair. Exactly like that. She stood on her toes to kiss his cheek, not caring who saw. The best things usually are. They left as the lanterns were being lit for the evening dancing. Tomorrow would bring plans to make, a wedding to arrange, a life to build together. There would still be those who whispered, who found fault, who thought they knew better. But tonight, riding home under stars just beginning to appear, Lena wore a yellow ribbon in her hair and a ring of promise on her finger, Wyatt's mother's ring, produced from his pocket like magic after her acceptance. The future stretched before them, bright with possibility. No regrets, Wyatt asked as they turned into the ranch road. None. You. Only that I didn't ask sooner. She laughed, the sound carrying across the valley like music. Everything in its time, Wyatt Dorsey. Everything in its perfect time. And it was perfect not despite the struggles that had brought them here, but because of them. They'd been tested by weather and gossip, loneliness and fear. They'd chosen each other not in some fairy tale moment, but in the daily decision to show up, to work together, to see past surface to soul. Let the town talk. Lena and Wyatt had more important things to do, like build a life worth living. One shared meal at a time. The accident happened on a Tuesday afternoon in late May, 2 weeks before the wedding date they'd set. Wyatt had gone with Jim and Pete to move cattle to the summer pasture routine work he'd done 1,000 times before. Lena was in the garden, planting herbs for the kitchen, when she heard the thunder of hooves approaching fast. Too fast. She looked up to see Pete Santos riding hard toward the house, and her heart stopped. Nobody rode like that unless something was terribly wrong. Miss Lena. Pete pulled up in a cloud of dust, his young face white with fear. It's Wyatt, his horse spooked, threw him bad. He hit his head on a rock. The trowel fell from her numb fingers. Where? Up at Devil's Creek. Pa's with him. But he's hurt bad, real bad. She was already running for the barn. Saddle my horse while I get supplies. Her hands moved automatically, gathering clean cloths, the bottle of whiskey for cleaning wounds, the small medical kit she'd assembled over the months. Her mind, though, was spinning with terrible possibilities. Head injuries were unpredictable, dangerous. Men died from them. Even strong men, even men who seemed invincible. Not Wyatt. Please, not Wyatt. The ride to Devil's Creek was the longest of her life. Though Pete pushed the horses hard, he told her what happened as they rode. A rattlesnake had spooked Wyatt's horse, sending it rearing. Wyatt, usually so sure in the saddle, had been caught off balance and thrown. His head had struck a rock outcropping on the way down. They found Jim kneeling beside a still form near the creek. Wyatt lay on his back, terrifyingly motionless. Blood matted his dark hair, and his face was pale as winter snow. He's breathing, Jim said quickly as Lena dropped to her knees beside them. But he won't wake up.
Hasn't moved since he fell." Lena's hands were steady as she examined the wound, though her heart was racing. The gash on the side of his head was deep, but clean. What worried her more was the knot already forming, the way his pupils didn't respond properly to light. "We need to get him home," she said. "Pete, ride to town for Doc Harrington. Tell him to come immediately." "But the doc's—" "I don't care if he's delivering triplets. You drag him here. Go." Pete went. Lena and Jim fashioned a travois from branches and blankets, moving Wyatt as carefully as they could. The journey back to the ranch was agonizing. Every bump in the trail, every jostle might be doing more damage. Wyatt never stirred, never made a sound. They got him into the house, into his own bed. Lena cleaned the wound, bandaged it, tried everything she knew to rouse him. Nothing worked. He lay still as death, only the slight rise and fall of his chest showing he lived. Doc Harrington arrived as the sun was setting. He was a good doctor, competent and caring, but Lena could read the worry in his eyes as he examined Wyatt. "The wound itself isn't the problem," he said finally. "It's the blow to the head, the swelling inside. Sometimes men wake up from these things in a few hours. Good as new, sometimes." He didn't finish. "What can I do?" "Keep him comfortable. Try to get water into him if you can. Talk to him sometimes, that helps. And wait." He packed his bag. "I'll come back in the morning. Send Pete if there's any change." After he left, Lena pulled a chair beside the bed. Jim hovered in the doorway. "Maria's expecting me, but I can stay." "Go home," Lena said gently. "There's nothing you can do here. I'll watch him." "This ain't proper, you being here alone with him all night." She looked up at him, and something in her face made him step back. "Jim, I walked through a blizzard for this man when he was a stranger. Now he's going to be my husband. I don't give a damn about proper." Jim nodded slowly. "I'll be back at first light." Alone with Wyatt. Lena took his hands so still, so unlike the strong, sure hands she knew. She'd held these hands while they danced at the fair, watched them gentle a spooked horse, build a fire, trace her face with infinite tenderness. The thought that they might never move again was unbearable. "You have to wake up," she told him. "We have plans. Remember a wedding in 2 weeks? Mrs. Garrett's making her famous apple cake. The Santos family is playing music. You can't miss your own wedding." No response. She tried everything cool cloths on his forehead, her fingers on his pulse. Spoonfuls of water trickled between slack lips. Nothing reached him. As night deepened, she began to talk, really talk, the way she never had before. "I never told you about Charles," she said. "The man I was supposed to marry back in Alabama. You asked once what happened before, and I changed the subject. But you deserve to know." The story came slowly at first, then in a rush. Charles Whitman, the banker's son, handsome, charming, everything a girl was supposed to want. How he'd courted her despite her height, her independence, her refusal to simper and play helpless. How she'd convinced herself that was love. "I made my wedding dress," she said, holding Wyatt's unresponsive hand. "Spent months on it, white silk with pearl buttons, finer than anything I'd worn before or since. I was so proud of that dress." She told him about finding Charles with her cousin Catherine pretty. Petite Catherine, who giggled at his jokes and never disagreed with him. How he'd said Catherine was more suited to be a banker's wife. How the whole town had agreed, had actually been relieved that poor, tall, awkward Lena hadn't trapped the Whitman boy after all. "But here's what I never told anyone," she said softly. I was relieved too, standing there, watching them together. I realized I'd been trying to force myself into a life that didn't fit, like that wedding dress, beautiful, expensive, and absolutely wrong for me. She squeezed his hand. "You're not wrong for me. Wyatt, you're the first thing in my life that's felt absolutely right. You see me not the woman who's too tall or too independent or too much, just me. And I see you not the grieving widower or the silent rancher. The man who pays for strangers' lodging and brings thoughtful gifts and dances at fairs, even though he hates crowds. Still nothing. The night wore on. She kept talking about her mother, her childhood, dreams she'd never voiced. When she ran out of past, she talked about their future, the children they might have, the ranch they'd build together, the life stretching ahead like an unwritten book. "But you have to wake up for any of that to happen," she said, her voice breaking for the first time. "Please, Wyatt, I've been alone my whole life, and I was fine with that. But now I know what it's like to have someone to share the silence with. Don't leave me to face that silence alone again." Near dawn, exhausted and hoarse, she laid her head on the bed beside him. She must have dozed, because she woke to a sensation of movement, fingers in her hair, gentle and familiar. Her head snapped up. Gray eyes were looking at her, confused but aware. "Wyatt." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Water," he croaked. She nearly spilled it in her haste, had to force herself to move slowly, support his head, let him sip carefully. When he'd drunk what he could, she helped him lie back. "What happened?" he asked. "Your horse threw you? You hit your head." Her hands framed his face. "You've been unconscious since yesterday afternoon." "Feels like someone used my skull for an anvil." "Don't joke. You terrified me." He focused on her face, seemed to really see her for the first time. "You've been here all night." "Where else would I be?" "Your reputation can go hang itself." Tears she'd held back for hours finally spilled over. "I thought I was going to lose you, before we even had a chance to start." He reached up, thumb brushing away her tears. "Not getting rid of me that easy." "Promise. Promise." Jim arrived with the sunrise, found them like that Lena in the chair, Wyatt awake and holding her hand. The older man's relief was palpable. "Thank the Lord. Pete, run for the doc. Tell him the patient's awake." The next hours were a blur. Doc Harrington examined Wyatt thoroughly, declared him lucky but likely to recover fully with rest. Mrs. Garrett arrived with soup and took charge of the sick room with military efficiency. The Santos women came with food and offers of help. Through it all, a stream of visitors, ranch hands, neighbors, even some townspeople who'd heard about the accident. It seemed half the county wanted to check on Wyatt Dorsey. "You see," Lena told him during a quiet moment between visitors, "you're not as alone as you think. People care about you." "They're here for you," he said, "to support the woman brave enough to take me on." But she saw the wonder in his eyes as person after person stopped by. 5 years of self-imposed isolation breaking down under the weight of community concern. Late in the afternoon, an unexpected visitor arrived. Tom Henley, hat literally in hand, looking uncomfortable but determined. "Heard about your accident," he said to Wyatt. "Wanted to say, that is, if you need help with the cattle while you're laid up, my boys and I can lend a hand." Wyatt blinked. That's kind of you, Tom." "It's neighborly. What folks do." He shifted his feet. "Also wanted to say, I'll be proud to attend your wedding, if the invitation's still open." "It's open," Lena said softly. After he left, Wyatt shook his head in wonder. "Did Tom Henley just offer to help me?" "Seems your accident knocked sense into more heads than just yours." The crisis had passed, but Wyatt remained weak, dizzy if he moved too fast. Doc Harrington ordered complete rest for at least a week. "But the wedding," Wyatt protested, "will happen when you're well enough to stand through it without falling over." Lena said firmly, "I've waited this long. I can wait a bit longer." That evening, when the visitors had finally gone and the house was quiet, Lena sat beside his bed again. This time, he was awake, present, himself. "I heard you," he said suddenly. "Last night, talking to me." Heat rose in her cheeks. "How much did you hear?" "All of it, I think. About Charles, the wedding dress, how you see me." His fingers found hers. "Did you mean it?" "Every word." "Then I should tell you something too." He struggled to sit up more, and she helped him, adjusting pillows. "Sarah, my first wife, she was wonderful, sweet, gentle, everything a man could want. But I spent our whole marriage trying to be someone I wasn't. The successful rancher, the social husband, the man who had all the answers. She never asked me to be those things, but I thought that's what she needed." He paused, gathering strength. "When she died, the guilt nearly killed me too. Not just that I couldn't save her, but that I'd spent 3 years playing a part instead of just being myself. I swore I'd never do that again. And then I came along," Lena said softly. "And then you came along." His smile was tired but real. "You've never asked me to be anything but what I am. Never expected grand gestures or pretty words. You see me clear and choose me anyway. Do you know what a gift that is? The same gift you give me every day." He tugged gently on her hand, and she leaned down to kiss him, careful of his bandages, gentle with his pain. When they parted, both were smiling. 2 weeks, he asked. 3, maybe 4, until you're properly healed." 2, he negotiated. "I'll rest, take it easy, let you fuss over me. But 2 weeks. I want to make you my wife before anything else tries to get in our way." She laughed. The sound brightened the dim room. "Deal, 2 weeks." They sealed it with another kiss. And if anyone thought it improper for an unmarried woman to be kissing a man in his sick bed, well, Lena had stopped caring about such opinions long ago. She'd nearly lost him. She wasn't wasting any more time on other people's ideas of propriety. 2 weeks. Then she'd be Lena Dorsey, and all the whispers in the world wouldn't matter against the solid truth of that. They'd weathered storms and gossip, injury and isolation. They'd chosen each other with eyes wide open. The rest was just details. The conversation came on a night when sleep wouldn't visit either of them. Wyatt's headaches had returned with the evening, and Lena had given up any pretense of staying in her cabin after finding him pacing the parlor at midnight, one hand pressed to his temple. "You should be resting," she said, guiding him back to his chair by the fireplace. "Can't sleep, head's pounding like a smithy's hammer." She brought him the tea she'd learned helped willow bark and chamomile, then settled on the floor beside his chair, her back against his legs. They'd grown comfortable with such casual intimacy during his recovery, the careful boundaries of courtship softened by crisis. For a while, they sat in companionable silence, watching the fire burn low. Then Wyatt spoke, his voice quiet in the darkness. "Lena, there's something I need to ask you." Do you want children?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Lena's hand stilled on her teacup. "That's a rather sudden topic." "Not really. We're getting married in 4 days. Seems like something we should discuss." She set her cup aside, shifted to look up at him. His face was serious in the firelight, shadowed with more than just pain. "Do you?" she asked carefully. He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "Then, I had a son, with Sarah. He lived 3 hours. The words fell like stones into still water. Lena reached up, found his hand. He was perfect. Wyatt continued. 10 fingers, 10 toes. Had Sarah's nose, my stubborn chin. The doctor said his lungs just weren't ready, weren't strong enough." His hand tightened on hers. Sarah never recovered, not from the birth, not from the loss. She faded like a flower in drought, and I couldn't do anything but watch. "Oh, Wyatt." That's why I've been alone 5 years. Not just grieving Sarah, but terrified of going through it again, of wanting something so much and losing it, of watching another woman. He stopped, swallowed hard. Lena rose to her knees, taking his face in her hands. "Look at me." He did, and she saw all his fear there, raw and honest. "I won't lie and say nothing bad could happen," she said. "Life doesn't give those guarantees, but I'm not Sarah. I'm 31 years old, strong as an ox according to town gossip, and too stubborn to fade away from anything. She stroked his cheek. If we're blessed with children, wonderful. If not, we'll have each other. That's enough for me. Is it enough for you? You're enough for me, he said. You'd always be enough, but if we did have children, could you bear it? The risk. She considered carefully. My mother lost 3 babies between my brother and me. I watched her grieve each one, but I also watched her joy when she held us, the survivors. She used to say love was always worth the risk, even when it hurt. Wise woman. She was. Lena settled back against his legs. I'd like children, if we're so blessed. A little girl with your gray eyes, a boy with your quiet strength. But I don't need them to be happy. I need you. The rest is just possibility. Possibility, he repeated. I like that word better than expectation. So do I. They fell quiet again. Then Wyatt said, Speaking of possibility, Doc Harrington cleared me to move around more. Said I could even help with light work. Light work? Not moving cattle or breaking horses? No, but maybe moving into the foreman's cabin. She twisted to look at him again. What? Think about it. The house is repaired. Mostly. You've been in the cabin all these months. Doesn't seem right for a wife to live 50 yards from her husband. We're not married yet. 4 days, and everyone already thinks. He gestured vaguely. Let me understand. You're suggesting I move into the main house before the wedding. I'm suggesting we stop pretending distance equals propriety. You're here every night anyway when the headaches come. Your things are scattered between both places. It's impractical. Wyatt Dorsey, are you asking me to move in with you for practical reasons? That almost smile appeared. Would you prefer romantic reasons? I'd prefer honest ones. The smile faded, replaced by something deeper. Honestly, I sleep better when you're near. The house feels alive when you're in it. And I'm tired of watching you walk to that cabin every night when everything in me wants to ask you to stay. So ask. Move in. Not to the guest room. Not temporarily. Move in like you mean to stay. People will talk. People are already talking, at least this way. They'll be talking about something true. She considered it. The impropriety of it. The assumptions people would make. The confirmation of every whisper about their relationship. Then she thought about the nights she'd lain awake in the cabin, wondering if his headaches had returned. The mornings she'd arrived to find he'd barely slept, too proud to send for her. The careful dance they did around a connection that had already moved far beyond employer and employee, beyond even engaged couples. All right, she said. His eyebrows rose. Just like that. Just like that. You're right, it's impractical. And I'm tired of pretending I don't want to be here. When? Tomorrow. Jim and Pete can help move my things. She stood, stretched. But I'm using the guest room until the wedding. Fair enough. And no one else gets to know the sleeping arrangements. Let them assume what they want. Also fair. She bent to kiss his forehead, checking for fever out of habit. Your head's better. Getting there. Good, because if we're scandalizing the town, I need you healthy enough to enjoy it. His laugh followed her as she walked to the door. At the threshold, she paused. Wyatt, about children, we'll face whatever comes together. That's all anyone can do. Together, he agreed. I like the sound of that. The next morning brought predictable chaos. Pete's eyes went wide when Wyatt announced the plan over breakfast. You're moving Miss Lena into the house before the wedding. Problem with that. Wyatt's tone was mild, but there was steel underneath. No, sir, just Ma's going to have opinions. Everyone's going to have opinions, Lena said, passing him biscuits. Good thing we're not required to listen to them. Jim, more pragmatic, just nodded. Makes sense. Save heating 2 buildings come winter. Which room you want her things in? The main bedroom, Wyatt said, then caught Lena's look.
Eventually, guest room for now. They spent the morning transferring her belongings, not much, really. Her clothes, her few books, the sewing basket. Personal items accumulated over months. It took longer to clean the cabin, preparing it for whatever use might come next. Could rent it out, Jim suggested. Young couple starting out might need a place.
Maybe,
Wyatt agreed.
or might keep it for visitors.
Family. The word hung in the air. Family. Such a foreign concept for both of them, the orphaned woman and the widowed man. Building something new from the ashes of their separate losses. By afternoon, Lena was settled in the guest room. It felt strange and right simultaneously, being under the same roof officially. She kept catching Wyatt smiling at odd moments while she organized the kitchen, while she mended by the fire, while she simply existed in what was now their shared space. "What?" she finally asked. "Nothing, just the house feels different, fuller, like it's supposed to." "It's the same house." "No," he said softly. "It's becoming a home." That evening, Maria Santos arrived with her daughters, ostensibly to drop off preserves, but really to investigate the new arrangements. She found Lena cooking supper while Wyatt sat at the kitchen table, reading feed prices aloud from the newspaper. "So," Maria said, her tone carefully neutral, "you've moved in." "I have," Lena confirmed, not pausing in her work. "Before the wedding." "Seemed silly to heat two buildings," Wyatt said, echoing Jim's practical argument. Maria looked between them, then suddenly smiled. "Good. It's about time you two stopped this foolish dance. A blind man could see you belong together." "Maria," her eldest daughter protested. "You can't just say—" "I can and I will. These two have been through enough gossip and judgment. If they want to share a roof 4 days early, that's their business." She set down the preserves with emphasis. "Besides, anyone who thinks improper things are happening clearly doesn't know either of them." After they left, Lena and Wyatt exchanged glances. "Did Maria Santos just defend our honor?" Lena asked. "I believe she did." Wonders never cease. They ate supper together in the kitchen, as they had so many times before, but it felt different knowing she wouldn't leave afterward, that the evening would unfold here, together, without the artificial separation of two dwellings. After dishes were done, they settled by the fire, Wyatt in his chair with a book, Lena with her sewing. The domesticity of it should have felt strange after so many years of solitary evenings. Instead, it felt like puzzle pieces finally fitting together. "Read to me," she requested. He looked up from his book. "You want me to read cattle breeding records aloud?" "I want to hear your voice. Read the newspaper if you'd rather." He set aside the breeding records, picked up the week-old Denver paper. His voice rumbled through stories of politics and progress, railway expansion and territorial disputes. Lena let the words wash over her, less interested in content than cadence. "You're not listening," he accused after a while. "I'm listening to what matters." "Which is the sound of home." He set the paper aside, studied her in the firelight. "Do I make you happy, Lena?" The question surprised her. "What brought that on?" "I realized today that I've assumed a lot. Assumed you wanted this life, this isolation, this man with more baggage than prospects. But I've never actually asked, do I make you happy?" She set down her sewing, moved to perch on the arm of his chair. "You make me myself," she said. "That's better than happy. That's whole." He pulled her down for a kiss that was answer and promise combined. When they parted, she was breathless. 4 days, she said. 3.5. "Who's counting?" "I am, every hour." She laughed, standing before temptation overcame sense. "I should say good night." "You should." But he caught her hand as she passed, pressed it to his lips. "Thank you for taking the risk, for moving in, for seeing past what everyone else assumes to what we really are." "And what are we really?" Two people who found each other in a storm and decided to build a shelter together.
I like that. Good night, Wyatt. Good night, Lena. Sweet dreams.
She paused at the doorway.
They will be. They always are now.
As she prepared for bed in the unfamiliar room, she could hear him moving about, banking the fire, checking locks, the routine of a house settling for night. But underneath the familiar sounds was something new, the awareness that they were sharing these walls, this roof, this life they were building board by board. Tomorrow would bring more talk, more opinions, more judgment from those who thought they knew better. But tonight, in this house that was becoming home, two people who'd spent too long alone were learning the rhythm of together. And despite what anyone might whisper, it was good and right and exactly where they both belonged. The town hall had been transformed. What was usually a stark, functional space now bloomed with wildflowers in mason jars, white ribbons along the benches, and the soft glow of borrowed lanterns. It wasn't fancy by city standards, but to Lena, standing in the small back room in her mother's altered wedding dress, cream-colored silk with new buttons, taken in and hemmed to fit it, was perfect.
Stop fidgeting. Mrs., Garrett commanded,
adjusting Lena's collar for the third time.
You look beautiful.
I look like a woman wearing her dead mother's dress to marry a man in a town that's been gossiping about us for months. You look like a bride, a happy bride. That's all anyone worth knowing will see. Maria Santos burst in, slightly out of breath. They're ready. Half the town's here, even some who swore they wouldn't come. She grinned. Tom Henley's sitting in the third row with his wife, looking properly chastised.
And Wyatt, standing at the front like a man who's waited his whole life for this moment, which, knowing him, he probably has.
Lena's nerves, already taut as fiddle strings, vibrated at that. 2 days ago, she'd been sure. This morning, she'd been sure. But now, with the moment upon her,
"It's not too late,
Mrs., Garrett said gently, reading her face. If you're having doubts. Not doubts, just... Lena pressed a hand to her stomach.
What if they're right?
All those people who whispered, what if we're moving too fast? Proving their worst assumptions. Maria Santos crossed the room, took Lena's hands firmly in hers.
You listen to me. My Jim told me what you did walking through that blizzard, nursing Wyatt through injury, standing by him when the whole town talked. That's not scandal. That's love, real love, the kind that shows up and stays put.
But, no buts. You know what I see when I look at you two? I see my own story. Jim and I married 3 weeks after we met. Everyone said we were crazy, that it would never last. 22 years and 4 children later, those same people ask us for marriage advice.
Mrs. Garrett nodded. She's right. Besides, you think Wyatt cares one whit what people say that man would face down the entire town for you.
He already has, Lena murmured, remembering him confronting Tom Henley, defending her honor with fists and words. Then maybe it's time you face them for him. Maria squeezed her hands. Show them that Lena Mae Bellamy doesn't hide from anything, not storms, not gossip, not even a church full of judgmental busybodies. Lena straightened her spine, her mother's voice echoing in memory. Stand tall, girl. Height's not something to apologize for. You're right, both of you. She smoothed her skirt one last time. Let's do this. The walk from the back room to the main hall felt both endless and too quick. Then the doors opened, and she saw him. Wyatt stood at the front in his best suit, the one he'd worn to the spring fair when he'd proposed, now pressed and proper. His hair was neatly combed, his jaw clean-shaven, but it was his eyes that caught her gray as winter sky, but warm as summer rain, fixed on her like she was the only thing in the world worth seeing. The crowd blurred. The whispers, if there were any, faded to nothing. There was only the aisle between them, and then not even that as her feet carried her forward. You came, he said softly when she reached him. Did you doubt? Never, but I'm still grateful. Reverend Mills cleared his throat. Shall we begin? What followed was both ordinary and extraordinary. The traditional words love, honor, cherish. The exchange of rings, simple gold bands they'd chosen together. The moment when Reverend Mills asked if anyone objected, and the silence that followed was deafening in its completeness. But it was the vows that stopped time. "Lena," Wyatt said, his voice carrying clear through the hall. "6 months ago, you walked into my life through a blizzard. You brought warmth to a house that had been cold for 5 years. You looked at a broken man and saw someone worth saving. I promised to spend every day earning that faith, to stand beside you against whatever storms come, to never let you walk through darkness alone again." Lena had to swallow twice before she could speak. "Wyatt, you gave me shelter when I had none. Not just from the weather, but from a world that didn't quite know what to do with me. You saw me not too tall or too independent or too much just me. I promised to keep seeing you too. Not the rancher or the widower or what anyone else thinks you should be. Just you. Always you." "By the power vested in me," Reverend Mills said, his own voice suspiciously thick, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Wyatt, you may kiss your bride." He did, thorough enough to make several church ladies gasp and Jim Santos whistle appreciatively. When they parted, both were grinning like fools. "Ladies and gentlemen," the Reverend announced, "may I present Mr. and Mrs. Wyatt Dorsey." The applause was immediate and, surprisingly, thunderous. As they walked back down the aisle, Lena saw faces she'd expected to be cold smiling instead. Even Mrs. Henderson from the church auxiliary nodded approvingly. The reception was in the churchyard, tables groaning under the weight of food contributed by what seemed like every family in the valley. There was music, the Santos men with their guitars, joined by others with fiddles and harmonicas, dancing on the packed earth, lanterns strung between trees as the sun set. "Did we invite this many people?" Lena asked, as yet another neighbor offered congratulations. "I sent word to a few folks," Wyatt admitted. "Might have spread from there." "Might have." "Seems people like a happy ending, even to a story that started with scandal." They were pulled apart, then Lena by church ladies wanting to admire her dress and ring. Wyatt by ranchers slapping his back and offering marriage advice with varying degrees of usefulness. It was during a quiet moment, when Lena had stepped aside to catch her breath, that John Morrison approached. The handsome rancher who'd tried to hire her away looked less cocky than she'd ever seen him. "Hey, Mrs. Dorsey," he said formally. "Congratulations." "Mr. Morrison, I owe you an apology. What I said at the spring fair, it was ungentlemanly, insulting." "Yes, it was." He blinked at her directness. "I'm trying to apologize." "And I'm listening. Continue." A reluctant smile tugged at his mouth. "You don't make things easy, do you? You suggested I was property to be bought, that my relationship with Wyatt was transactional. I was wrong, dead wrong." He looked across the yard to where Wyatt was laughing at something Jim said. "Any fool can see what you two have is real. I was jealous. I suppose, man like Dorsey quiet. Keeps to himself, lands a woman like you without even trying." "He tried," Lena said softly. "Just not in ways that show. Grand gestures are easy, Mr. Morrison. It's the daily kindness that takes real effort." "Lesson learned." He offered his hand. "I hope we can start over. Be neighbors, if not friends." She shook it. "Neighbors is a good start." As he walked away, Wyatt appeared at her elbow. What did Morrison want? "To apologize and to learn, I think." "Learn what?" She turned into his arms, not caring who saw. That the best things in life aren't won or bought. They're built, day by day, storm by storm. "Dance with me, Mrs. Dorsey." "Always, Mr. Dorsey." They joined the other couples on the makeshift dance floor. The music was lively, a reel that had everyone laughing as they tried to keep up. But then old Sam Martinez picked up his fiddle and played something slower, sweeter. "This is for the newlyweds," he called. "Everyone else, give them room." The other couple stepped back, forming a circle. Wyatt and Lena stood in the center, suddenly alone despite the crowd. "Scared," he murmured as he took her in his arms. "Terrified? You—" "Petrified, but not of this." He spun her gently. "Of everything that comes after. Of being a good husband. Of not failing you like—" "Stop!" She pressed her fingers to his lips. "You're not him anymore. The man who lost his wife. You're the man who found me. Different story, different ending. Promise." "Promise." They danced while the town watched the tall woman from Alabama and the quiet rancher who'd hidden himself away for 5 years. Two people who'd found each other in the most unlikely way and chosen to build something together despite every obstacle. When the song ended, applause erupted. But more than that, Lena heard acceptance in it. They'd proven themselves not by conforming to expectations, but by being steadfastly, stubbornly themselves. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of food and music, laughter and well-wishes. Even the weather cooperated, stars brilliant in the clear sky. It was near midnight when they finally made their escape, Pete driving them home in the decorated wagon while the remaining guests called out final congratulations. "Well," Wyatt said as they pulled up to the ranch house, their house now, "officially, we did it. Survived the wedding. Got married despite everything." He helped her down, holding her a moment longer than necessary. "Any regrets?" "Only one." His face fell. "What?" "That we didn't do this sooner." His laugh echoed across the valley. Then he swept her up in his arms, carrying her over the threshold despite her protests about his recently healed head. "Tradition," he said firmly. "Some things you don't mess with." He set her down in the parlor. Their parlor, where they'd weathered storms and shared stories and built the foundation of whatever came next. The fire was already laid, courtesy of the Santos family. Flowers from the reception decorated the mantel. "Home," Lena said softly. "Home," Wyatt agreed. "Finally and fully." She turned in his arms. "Thank you." "For what?" "For seeing me that first night at the depot. For the room at the boarding house. For the job. For defending me. For waiting until I was ready. For—" He kissed her quiet. "Thank you," he said when they parted. "For walking through that blizzard. For staying. For choosing us when everyone said we were wrong. For making this house alive again. We're quite the pair of grateful fools, aren't we? The most grateful, the biggest fools, and the luckiest people in the territory." They stood there in their parlor, still in wedding clothes, holding each other while the fire crackled and the clock ticked toward a new day. Outside, an owl called. Inside. Two people who'd spent too long alone marveled at the simple miracle of together. "What now?" Lena asked. "Now," Wyatt smiled, that full, real smile she loved. "Now we live, day by day, storm by storm, together." "Together," she agreed. "I like the sound of that." And in the morning, when the sun painted the mountains gold and the world woke to a new day, Mr. and Mrs. Wyatt Dorsey would wake too. There would be coffee to brew and cattle to tend, meals to cook and life to live. The town would still gossip, that was what towns did. But the words would have no sting now. Because some truths were stronger than whispers. Some bonds were forged in fire and tested by storm. And some love stories began not with lightning, but with the quiet recognition of two souls finding their way home. This was theirs, and it was just beginning. The morning sun painted the kitchen golden as Lena kneaded bread dough, her movements practiced and peaceful. 6 months had passed since their wedding. 6 months of building a life stitch by stitch, meal by meal, day by ordinary day. The kitchen window stood open to the September breeze. carrying the scent of ripening apples from the tree they'd planted together in July. She heard Wyatt's boots on the porch before he appeared in the doorway, hat in hand. That particular expression on his face that meant he had something to say but wasn't sure how to begin. "Coffee's hot," she said without turning around. "Breakfast in 20 minutes. Actually," he cleared his throat. "Could you come here a minute?" She dusted flour from her hands, turned to face him. "What's wrong?" is one of the horses. "Nothing's wrong. Just come see." Intrigued, she followed him out to the porch. There, leaning against the railing, was a small wooden chest she'd never seen before. The wood was polished smooth, brass hinges gleaming in the morning light. "What's this?" "Open it." Inside, nestled in soft cloth, lay a ring, not fancy silver rather than gold, set with a small blue stone that caught the light like captured sky. But it was the paper beneath it that made her breath catch. A deed to the ranch, with both their names listed as owners. "Wyatt, should have done it months ago," he said quietly. "This place isn't just mine anymore. Hasn't been since the day you decided to stay. You've worked it, improved it, made it home. Only right your name should be on the papers." She lifted the ring, noticed the engraving inside L and W weathered together. "The stones from Montana," he explained. "Sapphire. Man at the assayer's office said they're finding them up there. Blue as anything. Seemed right, something Western, something strong, something that reminded me of your eyes. You already gave me a wedding ring." "That was for the promise. This is for the proof." He took the ring, slid it onto her right hand. "For surviving our first 6 months, for every pot of coffee, every mended shirt, every time you've looked at me like I'm worth the trouble." "Oh, Wyatt." She framed his face with her hands. "You've never been trouble. Work, maybe, but good work. The kind worth doing." He kissed her there on the porch with the morning sun warm on their faces, and the whole day stretching ahead full of possibility. When they parted, she was crying and laughing simultaneously. "Silly man," she said, "making me emotional when I have bread to finish." "Not silly, grateful." He touched the ring on her finger. "Every single day, grateful." They went inside together, Lena returning to her bread while Wyatt settled at the table with his coffee. Such a simple scene, one that played out in countless homes across the frontier. But for two people who'd spent so long alone, the ordinary had become extraordinary. "Jim says the Hendricks place finally sold," Wyatt said, scanning the weekly paper Pete had brought. "New family from Ohio. Man, wife, 3 children. Children will be good for the valley. Quiet as it's been." He turned a page. "Also says there's a harvest dance planned for next month. Biggest one yet." "Are you asking me to a dance, Mr. Dorsey?" "Considering it, Mrs. Dorsey. Though I recall the last time we danced in public. It caused quite a stir. That was before we were married. Now we're respectable." She shaped the dough into loaves. "Mostly." He laughed. "Speaking of respectable, Tom Henley's wife is organizing a quilting bee. Asked specifically if you'd come." Did she now? Lena considered this. "I suppose I could. My mother always said quilting bees were where the real business of a town got done." "Your mother sounds like she was a wise woman." "She was." Lena set the loaves to rise. "She'd have liked you." "Think so?" "Know so. She had a soft spot for quiet men who showed their feelings through actions. Said they were rarer than gold and twice as valuable." A comfortable silence fell as she moved about the kitchen and he read his paper. Then Wyatt said, "There's something else." "Oh." He set down the paper, met her eyes. "Doc Harrington stopped by yesterday while you were in town. I asked him had some questions about my head. After the accident." Lena's hand stilled. "Are the headaches back?" "No, nothing like that. I wanted to know." He paused, gathered himself. If it might affect other things, future things, children. The word hung between them, fragile as spun glass.
What did he say?
Lena asked carefully. Said there's no reason to think it would. Said I'm healthy as a horse, hard head and all. He stood, came to her. I know we said we'd let it be a possibility, not an expectation, but lately I've been thinking.
So have I, she admitted, especially with Maria Santos bringing her new baby around. Such a sweet thing.
Made me remember holding my son those few hours. The weight of him, the way he gripped my finger. His voice roughened. I was so scared then. Scared of losing him, which I did. Scared of failing him, failing Sarah. You didn't fail anyone.
Maybe not, but I let fear rule me for 5 years after. Don't want to do that anymore.
He took her flowery hands in his. What do you think, are we ready to try for that possibility? She thought about it, really thought about it. The risks, the fears, the what-ifs that could paralyze a person if they let them. Then she thought about this man who'd taken a chance on a stranger in a storm, who'd defended her honor and waited for her heart, who'd made her a partner in every sense.
I think, she said slowly, that we've weathered enough to handle whatever comes, and if we're blessed with a child, they'll be the luckiest child in Colorado. Look at what they'll inherit, a ranch with their mother's name on the deed, a father who knows the value of patience, and parents who chose each other against all odds.
Is that a yes? That's a yes to trying, to hoping, to facing whatever comes the way we always have. Together. Always together. He spun her around the kitchen, flour flying, both of them laughing like youngsters. When he set her down, she was breathless, and his eyes were bright with something that looked like joy.
I love you, Lena Dorsey.
And I love you, Wyatt Dorsey. Now let me finish this bread before it overrises. But he didn't let go immediately. One more minute. Let me just remember this morning, this moment. You with flour in your hair and hope in your eyes. This kitchen that smells like bread and coffee and home. All of it. So they stood there in their kitchen with the morning sun streaming through clean windows and the future unwritten, but no longer frightening. Two people who'd learned that love wasn't just the dramatic moments the storms weathered, the gossip faced, the vows spoken. It was this, the quiet choice to stay, to try, to hope, the daily decision to see each other clearly and choose each other anyway.
The bread,
Lena finally said. The bread, he agreed, releasing her. She shaped the last loaf, set it with the others, while she washed her hands. Wyatt poured fresh coffee, added cream the way she liked. Such simple gestures, such profound contentment.
What shall we do today? She asked. After chores.
Thought we might ride up to the ridge. The aspens are turning. Prettiest sight in the valley this time of year.
I'd like that.
Good. Pack a lunch, we could make a day of it. Wyatt Dorsey, are you courting me? Every day for the rest of my life, if you'll let me. She crossed to him, kissed him soundly.
I'll let you.
Later, as they rode toward the mountains with lunch in their saddlebags and the whole golden day ahead. Lena thought about the journey that had brought them here. A woman with nowhere to go. A man with too much space in his life. A storm that forced them together and revealed what had been waiting all along, not passion that burned hot and fast, but love that grew steady and strong like the mountains themselves. Penny for your thoughts, Wyatt said. Just thinking how different everything is from last year this time.
Better different?
She reached across the space between horses. Caught his hand. His mother's ring caught the light on her left hand. The new ring gleamed on her right. But it was the calluses beneath, the strength of their joined hands. That told the real story. The best different, she said. They rode on together into the golden morning. Two people who'd learned that sometimes love came quietly, not with grand gestures or perfect words, but with offered shelter and accepted help, with shared meals and comfortable silences, with the choice made daily to face the world together rather than alone. Behind them, their house sat solid against the sky roof repaired, walls strong, smoke rising from the chimney Lena had lit for the bread. Ahead, the mountains rose eternal and patient, keeping their secrets and their promises. And somewhere between what was and what might be, Wyatt and Lena Dorsey rode together toward all the possibilities that waited, unafraid and unhurried, knowing they had already found what mattered most, a hand to hold through whatever storms might come, and the courage to keep choosing love over fear, hope over doubt, together, over alone. It was enough, more than enough. It was everything. Thank you so much for listening to this story of love, resilience, and finding home in the most unexpected places. If you've made it this far, you've journeyed with Lena and Wyatt through storms both literal and figurative, and I hope their story touched your heart as much as it touched mine to share it. I'd love to know where in the world you're listening to this story. Please leave a comment below, and let's connect. Share your thoughts about Lena and Wyatt's journey, or tell me which part resonated with you most. If you enjoyed this tale from the American frontier, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 for more authentic stories of love, courage, and adventure from the Old West. Hit that like button if this story moved you. And please consider pressing the hype button to help more people discover these carefully crafted tales of the human spirit. Until next time, partners, keep riding toward your own horizons. Happy trails.